The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Good evening, everybody. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Hayes Reviews. My name is Nick. I'm the creator of the channel, and it is very lovely indeed to have you here. Tonight, we are continuing with our live reading of G. Edward Griffin's 1964 book, The Fearful Master, which is subtitled A Second Look at the United Nations. The subtitle, I think, is in reference to the first look at the United Nations being most people's assumptions that it is benevolent, that it is benign, that it is a peacekeeping organization, that it is interested in security and the well-being of the world's people, and it is trying to usher us out of these barbarous temptations we have to be loyal to our nation state, because let's be honest, the only thing that can lead to is war and pain and suffering and competition and fighting and strife. So we need this supranational body which is going to regulate those interactions between nation states and harmonize them. And as Wikipedia told us, it is going to, how did they use it? They used the word concerting as a verb. They are going to concert the behavior of the member nations. Now, of course, as I said in the part one of this series, almost all of the world's nations have now joined the United Nations. But we are here today to get some history and get some context to understand, is that a good thing? Because it might not be. We can't just go through life assuming, can we? Because you know what they say about assuming makes an ass of you and me. So let's dig into it. Let's ask some questions. Let's get some general grammar on the topic and find out from someone who's done the heavy lifting and gone so far as to write an entire book on the subject for us to benefit from. That man, of course, is G. Edward Griffin, who I think many people in my audience and watching this will probably be familiar with. If not, I did a little intro to him on part 2, I think, showing his website, mentioning the books and the good work that he's been doing for many, many years now, putting out interviews, documentaries, publications which help educate people about the threat of collectivism. Collectivism is the greater good. It is your rights, your freedoms, your individuality is subsumed by the greater good, by the needs of the collective, by the group, right? We're living through a time where the individual is not so important anymore and the group is more important. What group do you belong to? What are the needs of the society? What are the needs of the collective, in other words? And that is what G. Edward Griffin has been warning about for, I don't know, probably the majority of his life, I think. And he's still alive. He's still going, organizing conferences, maintaining his websites. I don't know if he's writing books these days, but he's interviewing, he's out on the circuit, and you can find him by typing his name into any good search bar. Although there's not many of those left nowadays, but I would head over to Odyssey and Rumble and Rockfin, and you'll find many hours of interviews with the man himself. And he's a wonderful guy, I think. That's my impression of him. And this book that we have been working through over the last week and a bit is quite a mind blower. It's very much enlightening in terms of helping us understand this ubiquitous organization, the United Nations. The book was written in the 60s, and it's quite shocking, particularly the last part 3 that we did on Tuesday night of this week. That part was pretty shocking because that bit revealed to us that so many of the men who were initially involved in the planning and the setting up and the organizing of the United Nations were communists. They were spies. They were outed. They were revealed to be so. And many of them kind of got away with it, and it didn't matter, and it doesn't matter. And I think what is being revealed to us through, as we work our way through this book, is that the United Nations actually has a massive linking and leaning towards collectivism and communism and socialism. And it's quite astounding because it's not really sold to us that way. It's not really explained to us. And so it's quite shocking, really. Particularly for anybody who might have gone through life just assuming that it was a benevolent organization. That's how it's portrayed in film, in media, many times. It doesn't really come under scrutiny. But you don't get to elect who runs or gets positions in the United Nations. You don't get to elect the people who are in that organization. You don't get to decide if you want to be part of it or not. There's no referendums. There's no decisions that are handed down to the people who get to put X's in boxes and think that that is them steering their nation and their country and their culture and their civilization. No. These decisions are made above and beyond your sphere of influence and my sphere of influence. But I think we should know about it, and it would benefit the world and the world's people to be aware of the history of this organization. At the very least, so we can hold it to account, so we can push through some kind of reform if necessary, so we can be very skeptical of the edicts and the plans and the schemes which come forth from the organization. Things such as the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. Things such as the World Health Organization recently declaring another worldwide emergency, which it also labeled in the news release that I read as fake. PHAIC, fake. So bear that in mind. The truth is often hidden in plain sight. But as you know, on this channel, we believe that the truth, the best place to hide it is in the pages of a book, which is why we get in there and we read the books. And that's what we're going to be doing tonight. So thank you all for being here. If you are watching live, it's great to have you here. And if you're watching on the replay, please remember that there is a pinned comment below the video with timestamps should you choose to jump directly to the meat and potatoes. You don't want the entree, you don't want the starters, you don't want the gazpacho soup of my ramblings and meanderings. You want to get straight into the good stuff. You can do that by looking at the comment, the pinned comment that I have put there with a timestamp, and you can jump ahead and get to the reading. But I do have a little bit of an intro preamble tonight. I'm going to get to that very shortly. I will just say hello to my stalwart YouTube fans, Frank, Gwen, Ashley, and LJ, and Adam. Lovely to have you all here. Very glad that you're joining in live and getting the benefit of this reading. With this book, I think it's okay to jump in and out at various points. It's not really a narrative that you need to start at the beginning and read in order, right? Each chapter has some fascinating information. Like the last one contained a bunch of names, people, some who were familiar to us because of our reading of Fabian Freeway. And I've since bookmarked all the Wikipedia pages of those names, and I took a screenshot of that and I shared it out onto Instagram today, because that is the list of names of people who were known communist spies who were involved in the organization and setting up of the UN. Very important information to know, and it gives you lots of threads to pull on, and it helps you map out the network of people who are left out of the history books, who are left out in many cases of the documentaries that we see on the history of the United Nations, and the Wikipedia pages as well. They tell us a little bit, they tell us some things, and they reveal more, I think, than we get in our mainstream schooling. So it's a good place to start to go and get some wider, deeper, more high resolution historical context and facts about things. But with that said, with that rambling done, let's get on with tonight's show. So just a reminder to anybody new to the channel that you can go to my YouTube page where most of my stuff exists. Now, I am also on Rumble and Odyssey, but those pages are not quite as established as this one yet. They will be, and I prefer those platforms, but for now, a lot of my stuff is here on YouTube. I've recently been putting out some short clips, and I've got a little program that helps me make these, and so I can get them out, and they're really easy to share. They're little hooks that will hopefully drum up some appetite and interest in the longer form stuff that we're doing, because not everyone, a lot of people get turned off by a 3-hour video, let's just put it that way. So these little 1-minute sound bites, often quotes from the books or from our explorations on Wikipedia to get some mainstream view on a topic, these can act as little hooks and lead people in. So feel free to have a look at those and share any of them if you feel they're useful or interesting. They are going onto my YouTube page, maybe 2 or 3 a day. I've set that up and automated it. What a wonderful thing the modern era is, where you can set it and forget it. Also, we've got the playlist tab. On the playlist tab, you can see all the previous books that we've read through on this channel. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 books now. Or the one we're reading now is the 8th. All of these books kind of, they're all, how can I say this? They're not all on the same topic, but they're all relevant to each other. And reading all of them really helps you get a bigger picture view of things, because they are books written about by the people who are running the plans and the schemes that we are living through and that we are seeing unrolled before our very eyes. But there are also people who write the history of the organizations who are rolling out these schemes, such as the story of the Rockefeller Foundation, written by the president of the foundation. Then we've also got the Fabian Freeway. I think that one is the real mind blower for a lot of people, particularly in America, because they don't realize what a huge impact and influence this tiny little group of lazy British socialists had on their country, and it explains a lot about where we are today. And then, of course, we're building up the Fearful Master playlist, one video at a time. I think we might have this book done by next week. I was kind of calculating today. We're getting through 30, 40 pages on each live stream. It's about 250 pages altogether. So about 4 more videos. I think we might be done. How about that? Okay. So that's the YouTube channel. Playlists tab and the Shorts tab. I wanted to highlight those. Okay, the next thing, we've got allmylinks.com/Hayes reviews. This is where you can find all my links. Surprise, surprise. So if you feel so inclined at any point to support the show, sending me a few hard-earned fiat units of currency with which I can pay my bills, buy more books, and improve this show for you, then please feel free to do so. And there's a few different ways you can do that. They're all here. There are also links here to my different channels, YouTube, Rumble, and Odyssey. I would really like to suggest that people go to Odyssey and make an account and watch there, because it's the best platform for free speech and it's not as evil as the other two. It doesn't seem to have as many evil connections, although I think it was bought recently, so I don't know what direction that'll head in. If you want to see posts that I put out when I'm broadcasting, then you can connect on Telegram, Instagram, or what I affectionately call Twixter, because they can't make up their mind, going through some sort of identity crisis. I guess it's X, but it used to be Twitter, and a lot of people still say Twitter, and a lot of people, but anyway, I'm on all 3 of those. I do different things on all of them, actually. So it's not like the same stuff that goes out to all 3. So consider following me there, and then you can keep up to date with what I'm doing. And I've got some cryptocurrency addresses. If you feel like sending me some of those through, please let me know on my email address if you decide to do that. I wanted to give an honorable mention to my Subscribestar page. This is subscribestar.com/Hayes Reviews. If you are interested in as I mentioned earlier, in the modern day, we can set it and forget it. And this gives you the opportunity to do that. Send me a few quid a month, the price of whatever you can afford, maybe a cup of coffee, maybe a cheeseburger, maybe even a book. It's up to you. There's all these different tiers. At the minute, you're not getting anything extra. You will get added to my private Telegram chat group, which is not open to non-paying people at this time, but I intend to build this out and add more to it as time goes on. But I have to extricate myself from my day job first before I can plow all that time into doing extra special things for people. But please consider that. Subscribestar, set it and forget it. A couple of quid my way each month. It would be wonderful if anyone is able to do that, but no problem if not. It's not a problem. So I want to give you something really useful that I've been benefiting from this week, and that is here, this is iReader.tv, and there's a 3-part course here on intellectual self-defense. Now, I've been through Richard Grove's Autonomy course, and within that course, you are given access to a bunch of other courses by other people. Tony Myers, who was the co-host of Grand Theft World for a while, he is a logic professor, and he's put courses together on the trivium and the art of critical thinking and using logic to identify weak arguments and fallacies. All good stuff, all very useful. But this course on intellectual self-defense blew my mind and is one of the most immediately practically useful bits of training that I've ever been through. I got to the end, and I actually even got to the end yet. I haven't finished the 3rd part. I got through parts 1 and 2, and my whole understanding of communication and interacting with other people was transformed for the better. And I want to strongly recommend and wholeheartedly recommend this to anybody who deals with what we might call NPCs or normies or whatever term, sheeple, any of those derogatory terms that we throw about. They're just human beings. We're human beings. None of us were born wide awake to all the things that are going on in the world. We've all been on our own journey, and we've all had to we've all been on the other side of the fence, is what I'm saying, right? So we got to have compassion and kindness and love and care for these people. And we have to also try to do what we can to pull them along and say, hey, on this side of the fence, it's actually better knowing what's going on in the world and having a coherent narrative that explains what's going on. Come over here, let me show you, right? But often we find ourselves at odds with the people when we're trying to discuss these things and have these conversations. This 3-part course will teach you how to deal with that. It will teach you how to handle the people who dismiss you, who make fun of you, who call you conspiracy theorists, the people who mock you, all these horrible interactions. It will explain why it is so difficult to get those interactions to work and why your way of dealing with them may be wrong, and this course provides you with other strategies of dealing with those interactions, right? I thought it was fantastic. iReader.tv, they have channels, they put out content. Hardworking guy. It's a fellow Autonomy student, Dylan. But this is up here for free, and I would encourage anybody to get in there and benefit from this learning, because it's hard-won, real-life knowledge. It's not something that he's read in a book and he's repackaged and he's telling you about it. It's like he's lived it, he's applied it, he's gone through it and made these realizations and connections himself. And there's this whole bombshell in part 3, which you can't find anywhere else. There is nowhere else, because this gentleman, Mr. Dylan, came up with it. So this chain of responsibility part 3 is entirely unique. But word of warning, don't start at part 3. Do it in order: part 1, part 2, part 3. That is my gift to you. I've benefited greatly, and you might as well. So I wanted to throw that out there at the start to benefit people, because if you're anything like me, which, let's face it, you might be, given that you're watching this channel and you're interested in the same kind of books as I am, and you're interested in doing the same sort of learning as I am, you might also experience the same frustration when trying to communicate with other people about these things. This is going to help you with that. I guarantee it. So I wanted to let you know about that. So it's iReader.tv is the website. And in fact, let me see if I can quickly grab that link, and I'm just going to chuck it in all the chats. All the chats. So there it is on YouTube. Grab it, bookmark it. There it is on Odyssey. And there it is on the other one, Rumble. No excuses. And you could even go and start watching that right now and come back to this on the replay later. I wouldn't actually mind if that's what you decide to do, because this is really good stuff and useful. Okay. Moving on. This is Twixter, and this is just a post I wanted to show from Jay Dyer. It went out on August the 5th. This got 1.6 thousand reposts, retweets, I should say. And this is Jay's picture of the Milner-Fabian conspiracy. And I wanted to show it just to remind people that once we have wrapped The Fearful Master, guess what the next book is that we are going to be reading? Yes, it is The Milner-Fabian Conspiracy by Eoin Ratu. Jay's talked about it a lot. He's not read the whole text to you word for word like I'm going to do, but he has digested it. You can see he's made copious notes there. He's a great person to listen to. Very well read, very knowledgeable on these kind of topics. But I just wanted to remind people that that's coming up next. So probably early September, we'll be cracking open a new book. This one is big. It's quite a chunky one. It's got a lot of pages. And I mean, it's quite thick. You see there. And if you kind of compare it over, like if we go to the book cam and you compare it to, it doesn't even, that's Fearful Master. Milner-Fabian Conspiracy is much bigger, much thicker. And it's clocking in at like 450, 60, 70, 480 pages. It's going to take us a while to get through that. So I think that is going to be very enjoyable and very nutritious for the mind, give us lots of learning and things to think about, and fill out a lot of context. because this book is going to connect the Fabian Freeway book we read. It's going to connect the Fearful Master. It's also going to go connect the Hidden History book that I've reviewed on the channel, and by way probably of the Paperclip Conspiracy, which I reviewed on the channel. This is going to bring a lot of things together. It was written in 2012, and as Jay says, everything happening in the UK at the moment was analysed, explained, and predicted in this crucial book. And this book is expensive and hard to find. So if you can't afford a copy of it at the minute, no problem. I got your back. We're going to read it together on the channel. So hang in there for that and spread the word, because I think a lot of people, 1,600 people tweeted this. I think quite a lot of people are interested in the contents of this book. All right. I'm going to have a quick sip. My mouth's getting dry. That was 28 minutes of shilling myself, but I hope it was worth it. The iReader TV stuff is really good, Heidi, and you're very welcome over on Rumble. Really do check it out. It's great. Okay. Operation Rum Punch. This is our little intro and recap of the book. This is part 1. Now, in part 1 of the book of The Fearful Master, Edward Griffin gave us a case study about a UN operation in a place called Katanga, which is in the Congo. And this is the Wikipedia page on that operation. I thought it would be a good recap because it's quite interesting the way they framed it and the emphasis that they've placed on certain figures and events. Very different framing of this operation than we got in our reading of Fearful Master. Much less emphasis on the murdering and the killing. And it's kind of whitewashed with certain terminology and words. But it's a good little nugget to remember. You can remember, right? Operation Rum Punch. It's quite a punchy thing punchy hook to put in your memory. And, let's face it, who doesn't like rum? I was reflecting a little bit on the name of this because these operations, Operation Fishbowl is one that springs to mind, but Operation Paperclip, for example, these names have significance. And I was wondering about Rum Punch, and I was thinking about rum. What is rum? Well, it is the favorite drink of pirates, right? You've always got Johnny Depp swaggering around looking for the next bottle of rum. And Rum Punch, well, punch has multiple meanings, doesn't it? But in the context of rum punch, it's kind of a drink that's sort of, I think, fruity, but it's spiked with alcohol to get you drunk, but to taste good, but to impair your senses and to make you less able to function, which is what alcohol does. But then also the other meaning of punch, which is, a violent act against somebody, transgressing upon their freedom for security and physical safety. A punch is the very sort of base level act of violence that humans are capable of. When you remove the weapons and the tools and all the other stuff out of it, you've got the punch, the fist. And then also it kind of reminds you as well of like the fist in the air, the image of that and what it's used for and which organizations use that. So it's an interesting name, and it can stick in your memory very easily. And you can bring it up with people. Oh, what about Operation Rum Punch? When they're saying how great the United Nations is, and the sustainable development is so good, and the WHO, we should listen to them. You can say, what about Operation? Well, that's interesting, but what do you think about Operation Rum Punch? And they'll say, what? And then you can open that door and start helping people understand. So let's recap Operation Rum Punch. So this was a military action undertaken by United Nations peacekeeping forces. And, if there ever was an oxymoron, peacekeeping forces is one of them. This was on the 28th of August, 1961, against the military state, the military of the state of Katanga, which was a secessionist state from the Republic of the Congo in Central Africa. So secessionist, they don't want to be part of the big republic anymore. They want to be left alone. And as I've said on previous videos, history itself is the story of the group of people who want to be left alone and the group of people that won't leave them alone. That's the history of freedom, at least. So the secessionist state, they want to be left alone. And the Republic of Congo says, nope, you're not being left alone. You're going to be part of us. Boy, get in here. And they say, no. And then the UN got involved. So what did they do? Well, the UN troops arrested 79 foreign mercenaries and officers employed by Katanga with little conflict. So that sounds very benign. They just arrested a few people. Excuse me, read them their rights. You do not say anything, but anything you do say may be held in evidence. Slap on the handcuffs. Put your hand on the head as they're getting into the car to make sure they don't bang their head, because you don't want them to hurt themselves. Get them in the car, drive them away, and that's it. And there were mercenaries. Mercenaries. That's not a good thing, is it? So you don't want mercenaries, foreign mercenaries running around your country. But the UN came in and arrested those mercenaries, and they did it with little conflict. Fiery but mostly peaceful, peacekeeping mission, it sounds like. So let's read a bit about the background. So the background is the main article is the Congo crisis, but this is Katanga's secession. Katanga contained the vast majority of the Congo's valuable mineral resources, and had attracted significant mining activity under Belgian rule. So mineral resources, I think that's a very key part of the puzzle. We don't want to overlook that. The Republic of the Congo want Katanga to be part of them, because then they can benefit from these mineral resources and they can, dole them out. Whereas the Katangese people are kind of like, well, they thought they were entitled to the revenue generated through the lucrative industry. It's like, well, it's ours. We live here. We mine it. We have the companies doing that. We should benefit. And they feared that under the new central government led by Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba, it would be redistributed among the Congo's poorer provinces. Okay? Now, was that fear justified? Well, yes, it was, because Lumumba has communist sympathies. What I like about this quote here, it says, the ruling party in the Katangese provincial government blamed Lumumba and his alleged communist sympathies. So these alleged communist sympathies are not alleged in the book, right? In Griffin's book and the books that he cites, it's pretty clear that Lumumba was totally sympathetic with the communists. He was wined and dined by the communists. They were giving him treats and women and alcohol and money. And so they had good reason to fear. But it's just funny that, Wikipedia, they're just throwing a bit of doubt by saying alleged communist sympathies here. But there was a collapse and they blamed Lumumba. Okay. Then comes on the scene Mr. Tshombe, president of Katanga province, and he's citing the collapse of order in the Congo and the threat of a communist takeover, declared the independence of the state of Katanga and appealed for Belgian assistance. So they want to be independent because this large bureaucracy over at the Republic of Congo, led by the communist Lumumba, was trying to muscle in and get their hands on that lovely mineral wealth. So Tshombe comes in and asks the Belgians to help resist this communist takeover. On the 12th of July, Lumumba and President Joseph Kasavubu appealed to the United Nations. So the Lumumba, the communist, he appeals to the United Nations and requests international troops to be dispatched to the Congo. And the UN Security Council complied. So you've got a communist appealing to the UN, and to which the UN security says, "Yeah, we'll do that." So the UN passed several resolutions calling for the withdrawal of Belgian troops and established a large multinational peacekeeping mission. And that mission was called the ONUC, which is United Nations Operation in the Congo, the ONUC. So remember, ONUC is referring to the peacekeeping UN mission. So Lumumba demanded the ONUC troops be used to forcibly put down the Katangese secession. Interesting. But they're a peacekeeping mission, right? So they shouldn't be doing anything forcibly. The Security Council resolved on the 9th of August that the entry of the United Nations force into the province of Katanga is necessary for the full implementation of this resolution, while also deciding that the United Nations force in the Congo will not be a party to or in any way intervene in or be used to influence the outcome of any internal conflict. So they said they're not going to get involved. We will go there. We'll send our peacekeeping mission there and we'll show up, but we're not getting involved or influencing anything. We're just going to be there. And Ed Griffin in the book points out that this is a very great example of the sort of political doublespeak that we those of us who think and pay attention and care about the meaning of words get frustrated by so often. And then, not happy with this, Lumumba appealed to the Eastern Bloc nations. So further, like revealing his sort of communist leanings, although it does sound like he would take military help wherever he could get it. Lumumba eventually gets murdered because of this conflict that he has with the Prime Minister. So the Katangese forces. Because of this declaration of secession, the Katangese quickly established its own armed force, which consisted of Belgian officers and tribal warriors. And by November, the force consisted of about 7,000 men. Then by March the following year, it was 600 European and 8,000 indigenous soldiers. So you had the Europeans and the indigenous Africans fighting side by side. I should say Africans, Katangese, and the indigenous Katangese and the European fighting side by side to defend this place that they lived, where they were working, where they had businesses, families, homes, and they put down roots, and they didn't want it to be taken over by this Republic of the Congo. There was then an escalation of the UN Katangese tension. Lumumba's death created a sense of urgency, and the UN Security Council passed a resolution permitting the ONUC to use military force as a last resort to prevent war. So again, this is the double think. We will permit you to commit acts of war as long as you're doing it to prevent war. You see how that works, right? War is okay if you're doing it to prevent war. The resolution gave ONUC significant latitude to act. What does that mean? That means permission to go start bashing some heads and shooting at buildings and vehicles, which is the description of events that we get in The Fearful Master, right? But here it's just described as significant latitude to act in the name of peacekeeping. Force could only be used to remove foreign soldiers and mercenaries if it was justified under the reasoning that such action would be necessary to prevent civil war. ONUC was not also authorized to impose a political solution by force or directly intervene in internal Congolese affairs. So you're allowed to arrest people if it prevents civil war, but you're also not authorized to go by way of for a political solution, and you're not allowed to intervene in internal Congolese affairs. But you can arrest people, but don't intervene in the affairs. This is crazy, isn't it? It's very, very strange and hard to make sense of it. I think basically they were allowed to go after the Belgian contingent, the European contingent in the Katangese military, or like that we just mentioned in the previous part of this Katangese forces. They're basically allowed to go after the 600 Europeans because they're not classed as being involved in the internal Congolese affairs, even though they probably lived there for however long and might have had businesses and families and be embedded within the communities. The Katangese government disregarded the resolution and carried forward with its plans, which resulted in a rise in tensions and was followed by a Katangese attempt to seize the town of Kabalo. UN troops resisted, sinking a gendarmerie barge and arresting 24 mercenaries. The event marked the first use of the permissions of the February resolution. Sorry, I got a frog in my throat there. UN officials decided to dispatch a new representative, and this was Connor Cruz O'Brien. Just honorable mention of Connor Cruz O'Brien, and just to let people know, he has a book telling the story, which I haven't read yet, but it's called To Katanga and Back, Connor Cruz O'Brien. It says up here, a UN case history. That book exists. It is there. It's pretty old. Not too old, but you can get it, and you can read about the man who was sent out there on behalf of the UN, 1962. Okay, so that book exists. Worth grabbing if you're into this topic and you like the first-hand accounts of people who were there, right? And good evening to Elizabeth, who's just showed up in the YouTube chat. Hope you're doing well out there. So O'Brien gets sent over, and the UN then requests the withdrawal of more advisors and demands that George Thissens, who was one of Tshombe's aides, leaves immediately. Thissons didn't want to go, so O'Brien ordered 3 Swedish soldiers to forcibly expel him. A scuffle occurred during the ensuing confrontation, during which it was rumoured the Thissons' family dog was shot. Who would start a rumour like that? I think that little anecdote tells you a lot about the quality of the people. You know, bullies, thugs, scum. Killing families' dogs to intimidate and to coerce, right? Meanwhile, a new Congolese coalition government had formed in Leopoldville under Prime Minister Cyril Adula. It faced great pressure to reintegrate Katanga into the Congo and risk collapse if this was not achieved. I think the reason it was risking collapse was because it wouldn't have had the mineral wealth and money that it needed to exploit those resources to make things tick over economically and to keep the ruling class sort of afloat, because they always need a good quality of life and good incomes and benefits and bonuses, don't they, for what they're doing. With his diplomatic overtures to Tshombe failing, Adula resolved that Katanga would not end its secession unless threatened with military force. And with the army in a state of disarray, the Congolese government instead appealed to ONUC, so that's the United Nations, for its intentions. On the 5th of August, ONUC created an independent Katanga command under Indian Army Brigadier K.A.S. Raja, with O'Brien as chief of mission, allowing local forces more operational initiative. So they've already had what do they have further up here? They were already given they were already given significant latitude to act, but then later on they got some more operational initiative. You see the language, how it's used and what it's used for, and it's used to hide the barbarity and the killing and the slaying and the murdering and the senseless onslaught of violence. And they just say, more operational initiative. So the article has more details about the prelude and the lead up, some interesting stuff about the opposing forces here. So on the eve of Operation Rum Punch, the UN had 5,720 troops. And they were Indian, Irish, Swedes. I think that's it. Some Ethiopians. The ONUC command estimated that the Katangese gendarmerie numbered over 13,000 men. So they sent in just less than 6,000 to go up against double that. 460 of their officers were Europeans who had recently developed a plan for defending Katangese borders from central government forces. Can you imagine that, like, going up against this central government forces? Just an incredible ballsy move, but they obviously had a lot of passion, a lot of fire, and a lot of reason behind taking this stand, right? A few details about the operation. It commenced at 4 a.m. 2 companies of the Indian Dogra Regiment seized the radio station and the post office. So they went straight for communications, so that information about what was about to unfold could not get out, presumably. That's what Ed Griffin says in this book. And then here it says several mercenaries avoided capture by seeking refuge with locals. 11 mercenaries were then arrested around Albertville, and the mercenaries turned their weapons without. So mercenaries, and mercenaries. The language is so important. You know, when's a mercenary? When is it a terrorist? When is it a freedom fighter? When is it an insurrectionist? Right? You got to be so attuned to the meaning of words and what language is being used, because if you're not, you'll be left with a certain impression of events which will be inaccurate. And certainly the way that this thing is all described here on Wikipedia, it doesn't give you anywhere near the sense of barbarity and violence carried out by the UN troops that we get reading The Fearful Master and also the 46 Angry Men document, which we're going to read at the end of when we finish the book. It tells you a little bit about the aftermath, though, you know, which does give you a kind of admission, sort of. But Thomas R. Mokaitis describes it as, he says that despite its lack of complete success, Rum Punch could not be considered a complete failure. So that is some diplomatic, political, shuffling nonsense nothing, saying words without saying anything kind of language, isn't it? It wasn't a complete success, but it wasn't a complete failure. Okay. And then O'Brien, he called it a partial success as well. And Dag Hammarskjöld, who was the UN director or whatever, the number one at the UN at the time, he sent a congratulatory telegram to O'Brien. He did, however, feel that the operation had been terminated too soon. So he actually wanted it to go on for longer, I guess. The day following Rum Punch, Prime Minister of the Federation of Rhodesia condemned the operation, declaring that it had exceeded the UN's mandate. La Libre Belgique wrote that it had ruined the beautiful friendship between black and white in Katanga. And the British Foreign Office told the British mission at the United Nations to express concern that ONUC was going beyond what some of the major sponsors of the United Nations have ever envisaged. So some stronger worded criticisms there, but really nothing on par with, no mention of the 46 doctors, the 46 angry men here, I don't think. No, I just did a Control F of 46 angry. It's not even mentioned. Is maybe G. Edward Griffin's book mentioned? G. Edward Griffin, not mentioned. Philippa Schuler, the other on the ground, the other reporter, American reporter who was there on the ground. I'm just looking over there to see how to spell a name. She did this book, another book to put on your radar about this incident, Who Killed the Congo? I haven't read that, obviously it's still in the plastic wrapping, but this is Philippa. Let's see. Let's see if her book's mentioned. Philippa. I mean, she was there after all, so you'd think it would be worth mentioning her. Philippa Nope, she's not mentioned either. Strange. And then we also found out that Bertrand Russell was there. Bertrand. Nope, no mention of him. So, in conclusion, the Wikipedia article is lacking, I would say. Not giving a full picture of the mistakes, the missteps, and the evil that was perpetrated by the UN troops, the peacekeeping forces, the force for peace, the war to prevent war, right? Anyway, that's our little intro ramble for today. Hope you enjoyed that. Hope that was useful. And just remember, Wikipedia never gives you the full story on anything, I don't think. Good evening, Shame Anarchist. We got you in the chat on YouTube. Good to have you here. Welcome back. Hope you're doing well. So, I think that brings us about time to get into the book and do some reading. I've got 2 chapters planned for tonight because it's going to be about 30 pages, these 2 chapters. We can do about 30, 40 pages per stream. That seems to be a good amount. Gets us through the book at a nice pace, but it's not so ridiculously crazy long that people sort of die while I'm doing the stream because it takes up too much time. I don't want that. I hope you're all doing well, and I hope you're looking forward to the next chapter. We're going to be heading into part 3 of the book this evening after we've read the next chapter. So that's going to be very good because it's got quite an interesting title, but I will reveal that when we get to it. Let me adjust the mic. And move my glass of water. Cool. So we are on chapter 10. So if you remember the last few chapters, I suppose, so that whole intro was kind of a recap of part 1 of the book. The case study of what happened in Katanga, 1960, 1961. And then the next part of the book that we've been doing was the Master Planners. And this is all about the communist control of the United Nations. And this last chapter we read, chapter 9, the home team, which I marked up with a tab, that gives you a lot of names of key players who were involved at the founding of the United Nations and ended up being identified in sworn testimony as secret communist agents. And then the other chapters were about how a lot of people involved in this sort of thing, it's kind of compartmentalized, and they don't really know necessarily what the larger scheme is. So, as I've mentioned in the Fabian Freeway videos, socialism and communism generally appeals to good people, and it is designed in such a way as to hijack people's desire for justice and fairness and equality, and they don't want to see people in poverty. They want to see things equally and fairly distributed, and they have this sense within them that something's not right, and they can see that there's gross inequality, and communism appeals to that sense of fairness and equality. So, but it never delivers that, ever. Never. Not once. And the two chapters before, so chapter 7 and 8, really explain that the plans, the admitted purposes and goals of international communism, how it is aiming for one world government by rolling out a scientific system of control, which is the same as technocracy. So it's everything's science. You're gonna have scientists at the top. You're gonna have boffins with clipboards and graphs and algorithms and calculations dictating who gets what and how much of which product goes where. And every time that's ever been tried, it's led to mass death and famine, starvation, pain, suffering, and all these other horrible things. But people are kept in ignorance about the reality of that, the historical reality of that, and people even still today go around calling themselves socialists and communists and wearing the hammer and sickle t-shirts. In fact, there was a tweet today which I saw, I think it might have been Sal the Agorist calling someone out, a recent addition like to the Democrat Party in the US, an old picture of him wearing the hammer and sickle t-shirt at a party, and Sal the Agorist said, this shouldn't be allowed. People are rightly shamed and mocked and treated with disdain if they dress up as Nazis, and the same thing should be for communists, but it's not. Communists, it's fine. It's fine to call yourself a communist and a socialist and to dress up as one and to be openly aligned to that ideology, which ultimately is one of like slavery and coercion and starvation and destitution for the masses, while a very tiny elite run away with all the goodies, as is pretty much every ism that we've ever been handed, apart from anarchism, which I'm not going to get into right now. But that just literally means no ruler, which means no tiny class running things and scooping the cream of the milk and off the top while the rest of us wrestle down below for the leftovers. But anyway, Shame Anarchist can probably tell you a little bit more about that than I can. All right, let's get into the reading. I'll stop rambling. Apologies. So we got a quote from Dante Alighieri. This is from 1300. The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in a period of moral crisis, maintain their neutrality. Chapter 10. Neutrals and non-communists. Anyone who doubts the potent, if intangible, force of the United Nations should consider the eagerness even of communist regimes to join a club which is and will continue to be managed predominantly by its non-communist members. It's a very good point. That is from the United Nations Guardian of Peace, which was a Department of State publication. It reminds me as well of the revelation that it was the Soviets who insisted the headquarters of the UN be placed on the east coast of America. And then the last chapter, chapter 9, at the end that we read at the end of part 3 of the series, was detailing how all of those men who were involved in the founding of the UN were passing information back and were working with the Soviets basically to infiltrate, to gather information, to infect the system from within, basically, with their ideology. From the start, from the very beginning, the UN, that's what was happening at the UN. This statement by United Nations Ambassador Adlai Stevenson is a classic example of the technique of combining an observable fact with an absurd conclusion. The eagerness of communist regimes to join the United Nations is a fact that cannot be concealed. But since the obvious implications of this fact are not in accord with the image which the internationalists wish to present to the American people, we are told that 1. The communists are eager to join the United Nations because it is a potent, intangible force, and 2. The United Nations is, and will continue to be, managed by non-communists. As for the potent, intangible force argument, little needs to be said. Anyone who is familiar with even the bare rudiments of communist strategy and tactics knows that the communists do not join or support an organization merely because it is a potent force. They join organizations either to destroy them or to take them over and use them for their own purposes. They support an organization only if it advances the cause of communism. But how can this be if the organization is, as Mr. Stevenson says, managed predominantly by its non-communist members? Part of the answer became painfully obvious during the investigation of United States non-communist employees at the United Nations. The other part is the subject of this chapter. At the time of this writing, the United Nations has approximately 6,000 employees in the Secretariat. About 1/4 of these are classified as professional, which means that they hold top supervisory and policy-making positions. These are filled according to the geographical origin of the member nations and in proportion to the various contributions to the total UN budget. The United States, therefore, is entitled to approximately 1/3 of the professional appointments. The 2/3 balance comes from other nations, communists as well as non-communist. Theoretically, the United States bars communists from holding government jobs, but as we have seen, this has been only a minor inconvenience to the party faithful. For years, secret underground communist agents have moved with ease throughout our entire governmental structure, where they have been protected and promoted. The exposures of a few years ago were the result of congressional investigations which now have been, for all practical purposes, completely discontinued. In France, the Communist Party is the biggest political party in the entire country, and it holds the balance of power in the French Assembly. The French Constitution even goes out of its way to make it illegal to discriminate against communists in government jobs. A communist is head of the French Atomic Energy Agency and was recently made advisor to the European Centre of Nuclear Research. It would be absurd not to expect the communists to be well represented among France's quota of employees and delegates at the United Nations. Italy is in almost the same position. At each election for the past 8 or 9 years, the communists, posing as a legitimate political party, have gained a larger and larger vote at the polls, to the point where today they hold the balance of political power in that country. Much of this power in Italy comes from the influential labour unions, the largest of which is completely communist-dominated. As the Wall Street Journal observed, quote, "The Italian government can't legally keep communists out of the government. Further, the laws there provide that questionable characters have the same right to government jobs as anybody else, even if the job is a classified position. Also, there are no statutes the Library of Congress can find to protect military secrets." Even Great Britain allows communists to hold government jobs so long as they are not classified as sensitive positions. The British do not consider United Nations employment as sensitive. A Senate subcommittee investigating this situation reported that certain UN delegates from foreign countries have been invited to Communist Party headquarters in New York to lecture local party leaders. One of these was from the French delegation, who gave a speech on the problems of the French Communist Party in relation to the situation in Indochina. The other was from the Indian delegation, who lectured on the problems faced by the Communist Party in India with the dissemination of propaganda. Mr. Joseph Z. Kornfeder, a former communist who trained in Moscow and who specialized in methods of communist political warfare in this country, spoke before the Congress of Freedom in 1955 and told his audience, quote, "How many communists, fellow travelers, and sympathizers there are among the UN employees, no one seems to know. But judging by their number among the American personnel, there can be no doubt that the communists control the UN and its staff association and use it for all it's worth, which means that most of the special agencies at UN headquarters are, in fact, operated by them and coordinated through the communist cell in the UN Staff Association. That quote, which is quite damning, is from The Communist Pattern in the UN, which is a speech by Joseph Z. Cornfetter, Veterans War Memorial Auditorium, San Francisco, April 1955. I'm sure it's changed, in the intervening years. I'm sure they got rid of all the communists and now it's non-communists running it, right? Right? The situation was summarized by the US News and World Report in 1952 when it stated, quote, US authorities have no power to dig into the backgrounds of UN employees from other nations. Although they have information indicating heavy communist infiltration among these employees, some UN employees who come from Great Britain, France, Mexico, Canada, and other non-communist countries are known or suspected communists. An informed estimate suggests that as many as one half of the 1,350 administrative executives in the UN are either communists or people who are willing to do what they want. Note that the date of this estimate was 1952. Communist influence within the governments of the world has greatly expanded during the intervening years. Since the United Nations was first launched in 1945, the Secretary General has traditionally been portrayed to the American people as the epitome of neutralism, the ideal non-communist as distinguished from an anti-communist, the truly impartial man. If the Secretary General had been portrayed as openly anti-American and pro-communist, we Americans would have withdrawn our support long ago. Knowing this, the strategists decided from the very beginning to select men with obscure pasts, men who were not actual party members, but who were ideologically so compatible that they could be relied upon to carry the ball for the party. A brief look at the record will illustrate the wisdom of this strategy. Trygve Lie. Politically, Trygve Lie, the first United Nations Secretary General, was a dedicated socialist, a Labour lawyer, and a high-ranking member of the Social Democratic Labour Party in Norway, an offshoot of the early Communist International. According to Leon Trotsky, one of the founders of the worldwide communist apparatus, the Norwegian Workers' Party had the reputation of being a radical party. In the past, it belonged to the Third Communist International. Trotsky further revealed that Trygve Lie was no stranger to the communists in those early days. Lie had visited Moscow in 1921 and, as Trotsky put it, had been identified with the Comintern at that time. When Trotsky, the arch-enemy and rival of Stalin, was exiled in Norway, Trygve Lie was the Minister of Justice of that country. Acting in accordance with the wishes of Stalin, Lie confronted Trotsky with an ultimatum of choosing between either ceasing all criticism of the communist regime in Moscow or going to jail. Trotsky continued to write exposés of the ruthlessness of Stalin and his henchmen. Lie consequently had him thrown in prison and later deported him to Mexico. Commenting on the desirability of admitting Red China to the UN, Lie revealed an almost unbelievable naivety about the nature of communism when he wrote, quote, "Once before, the world had seen a communist state, the USSR, isolated by the West after a successful revolution. I had always believed that this was a great mistake and that the West instead should have sought every means to fuller intercourse with Russia in the 1920s. Such a policy might well have influenced the development of the Soviet state in a direction other than the one it took." That quote is from, I think that's from Trygve Lie's book, which is written down here. It's called In the Cause of Peace. Trygve Lie. That's his book. If you want to grab that one. One of the first items on the agenda of the newly created United Nations was the election of the President of the General Assembly. At first, the United States delegation considered nominating Lie for the position, but later shifted its support to Henry Spaak, a Belgian socialist. What happened next is described by Lie. On the morning of the 10th, the day on which the President of the Assembly was to be elected, Fyodor T. Gusev, the Soviet ambassador in London, sought me out. His delegation, he said, had been informed by the Americans of my withdrawal. Nevertheless, the USSR, together with its Eastern European associates, wanted to nominate me. His delegation had conferred with the United States delegation upon hearing of my withdrawal, and as a result of the meeting, the Americans had agreed to revert to their original support of my candidacy. The Soviet Union would nominate me, he added, and the Americans would vote for me. Mr. Gromyko strode to the rostrum and declared, "Weighing the candidates, which have recently been mentioned in connection with the election of the President, the Soviet delegation has come to the conclusion that the most appropriate candidature would be that of the Foreign Minister of Norway, Mr. Trygve Lie." Wincenty Rizmowski of Poland then rose in dutiful support of the nomination and spoke of Norway and of me in generous terms. He was followed by Dmitry Manilewski, the old Bolshevik from pre-Stalin days who was then Foreign Minister of the Ukraine SSR. SPAC won the election by just 3 votes. But, as Lie reminisced, quote, "There is no doubt that the results of the election were felt long after and clearly influenced the subsequent election of the Secretary-General." The post of Secretary-General is infinitely more important than that of President of the Assembly. So when the time came to fill this post, Washington and Moscow once again moved in unison. Lie wrote, "I recall something that Andrei Vyshinsky said in the course of a conversation in London just before my election as Secretary-General. It was a most friendly talk in which Vyshinsky said that both the Soviet Union and the United States warmly advocated my nomination and that Mr. Bevin of Great Britain could be brought around." As mentioned previously, Trygve Lie was outspoken in his advocacy of the admission of Red China to the United Nations. He had even taken the initiative in trying to drum up sufficient votes to make this possible. He further took the stand that Chiang Kai-shek should be ousted from Formosa. It is no wonder, then, that the communists were well pleased at having such a non-communist at the head of the United Nations, but Americans were led to believe just the opposite. During the Korean War, for instance, the Soviet delegation put on an impressive performance of pouting in public, supposedly over the way in which Lie was standing firm against their aggression. It was corny acting, but good enough to fool the American public, which is all it was intended to do. How the communists really felt about Trygve Lie is best revealed by Lie himself. When Lie first threatened to resign as Secretary-General, he threatened to do so on several occasions, he went to discuss the matter with his good friend Gromyko. Quote, "I went to see Mr. Gromyko. I announced the feeling that I should resign in protest at the American shift of position, and I have never found Ambassador Gromyko more friendly. His melancholy features lit up with sympathy, but he seemed half alarmed at my idea. Speaking for myself, he said, I hope you will not resign, and advise you against it. What good will it do? How will it change American policy? In any case, I would be grateful if you would take no action before I have time to consult my government." Tuesday, Mr. Gromyko took me aside. He had cabled Moscow, he reported, and Moscow's reply was no, definitely not. Much later, at the height of the controversy over communist penetration into the American quota at the United Nations, Trygve Lie finally did resign and was soon replaced by Dag Hammarskjöld. Dag Hammarskjöld. The rape of Katanga was primarily the result of his planning and direction. Although portrayed to the American people as a great humanitarian one need only recall his policy of deliberate deception, outright lying, and utter disregard for human suffering to fully appreciate the absurdity of such an image. In this regard, Conor O'Brien unintentionally indicted himself, Hammarskjöld, and the whole United Nations when he wrote, quote, "The greater the ambiguity in a Security Council decision, the wider was the Security General's margin of interpretation. Through ambiguities resolved, through margins skillfully used, The office of Secretary General had grown in stature and authority far beyond what the framers of the Charter seemed to have envisaged at San Francisco. This was quite widely recognized. Someone, I know not who, had even jested that the motto of the Secretary General ought to be per ambigua ad astra, which means ambiguity unlimited. To most good United Nations people, like myself, this growth seemed entirely healthy. As for Mr. Hammarskjöld himself, we had complete confidence in him as being, I quote the words used about him in private by a Russian member of the Secretariat, an integritous man. We even, I think, found something slightly intoxicating in the paradox of equivocation being used in the service of virtue. The thought of a disinterested Talleyrand, a Machiavelli of peace. All right, I like that. The equivocation being used in service of virtue. Something slightly intoxicating. This is your moral relativism, right? Well, lying is fine as long as you're doing it for the right reasons. Just like war is fine as long as you're doing it to prevent war. Okay? Moral relativism. And remember, if we go back to the Wikipedia article, criticisms on the UN, the very top one on the list on that page, number 1, was moral relativism. Continuing. Aside from that, however, Hammarskjöld was almost a political rubber stamp of Trygve Lie. He was an outspoken socialist, was openly sympathetic toward world communism, and pushed hard for the admission of Red China to the United Nations. It was while Hammarskjöld was in charge of UN affairs in the Swedish Foreign Office in 1951 that his government refused to support a mild UN resolution condemning Red China as an aggressor in Tibet. The kind of people a man chooses for his closest assistants and advisors is a good indication of the man himself. A glimpse at the Congo Executive Advisory Committee affords a fairly typical view. As we have seen, Conor O'Brien and Ralph Bunche held key positions in this committee. As for other members, O'Brien gave us an interesting insight when he wrote, quote, "Nobody said out loud, 'Keep communism out of Africa.' And indeed, most people round that table would have been genuinely shocked and for a moment even puzzled if such language had been used." Shortly after the Hungarian uprising, the United Nations sent a small team of investigators to Europe to interview as many of the refugees as possible in an attempt to document the tragedy. This was a far cry from the vigorous action they took against the anti-communists in Katanga, but it was a nice gesture just the same, which, while it did not help the Hungarian freedom fighters, was offered to the American people as evidence that the United Nations did do something. Active in this committee was Povle Bang-Jensen. Determined to do a conscientious job, he found that the only way he could get the refugees to testify was to personally promise them that their names would not be disclosed to anyone else, especially anyone at the United Nations. Most of these people still had relatives inside Hungary, and they feared that if their identities were known, their loved ones would be executed or imprisoned. This seemed fair enough, but not for Dag Hammarskjöld. He insisted that Bang-Jensen turn over the list of names in spite of Bang-Jensen's promise to the refugees. Rather than break his word or endanger the lives of innocent people, Bang-Jensen burned the list on the roof of the United Nations building. What a legend. Hammarskjöld was furious. Bang-Jensen was fired amidst a barrage of sweeping accusations, including insanity. No UN tribunal demanded reinstatement or cash indemnification. Interesting. I'm going to mark that little anecdote. I'd like to learn a bit more about it. Reminds me a bit about the investigations into the men who founded the UN and how some of them were paid off after by money, by American taxpayer money, when they didn't want to incriminate themselves. So a lot of them, they pled the Fifth. They used the Fifth Amendment. They chose not to speak because they didn't want to incriminate themselves. And then a lot of them got these $40,000 payouts after the fact. Kind of reminds me of that. You try and do the right thing, you get punished. Or at least you get sacked. Do the wrong thing. You got a job for life. Might get a promotion and a sports car. But I'd like to know more about this fella. His name again, which Pavle Bang-Jensen. Great name. To further complicate the situation, Bang-Jensen had been approached in confidence by a potential Soviet defector who pleaded with him to help arrange for asylum in the United States. The defector told Bang-Jensen that the 38th floor of the United Nations, where the top administrative offices are located, was actually under communist control, and that the Soviet secret police had successfully penetrated even the American intelligence services. What? This shocking information was then dispatched to Alan Dulles, head of Central Intelligence Agency, who, instead of moving resolutely to acquire the full details from this vital source of information, let Bang-Jensen and the Soviet defector cool their heels for 7 long and agonizing months before even expressing any interest. By this time, the defector had been sent back to Russia. The CIA never did ask Bang-Jensen for details. This is quite revealing and damning information. Shortly afterward, Bang-Jensen's body was found in a park in New York. Although it appeared to be a suicide, the surrounding evidence, as presented by the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, strongly indicates that he was murdered by the Soviet secret police for knowing too much. But the most interesting part of all is the fact that several of the Hungarian refugees interviewed were formerly officials of the Hungarian Communist Party. When testifying, they specifically wanted assurances that their names would not be made known to the Secretary General. One can only wonder why. U-Tant. One of the strongest political groups in Burma today is the Anti-Fascist People's Freedom League, an organization that leans considerably to the left. U-Tant was at one time the press and publicity director for this group, but it was U Nu, then Prime Minister of Burma, who really brought Tant into politics. U Nu regarded U Tant as his personal friend and advisor, made him his first secretary, and also appointed him to the United Nations. In short, Tant was the protege of U Nu. It is certain that Tant's political beliefs and basic orientation could not have strayed too far from those of his tutor without disrupting the close working relationship and mutual confidence so obviously shared by them for many years. What, then, is the political philosophy of U Nu? In a speech delivered on May Day 1948, U Nu declared, quote, "When I moved that the draft constitution of the Burma Union should be approved by the Constituent Assembly, I stated clearly that Burma was to be a leftist country. In such a leftist country, the production of commodities is not for the purpose of profit. Briefly, leftism is the policy by which the world is being turned from the wrong path to the right path. Lenin and Stalin, when building up Russia, did not use everything which they found in the writings of Karl Marx. They adopted what was suitable for Russia. In Red China, also leftist leaders adopted what was suitable for that country." Not very long ago, when my friend Ko On went to communist Poland, he was advised by Polish leftists thus, quote, "We don't go wrong because others go wrong. We do what is suitable for Poland, and we advise Burma to do what is suitable for Burma. See what Stalin did to build up Russia's own strength. In 1939, in order to build additional strength to Russia, he entered into a non-aggression treaty even with Hitler. When Trotsky was trying to bring about a world revolution, he accused Stalin and his followers, who were endeavoring to strengthen Russia." Got a lot of pictures I've just got to flick past here. "Of being traitors to the revolution. If we now look back in history, we find that Stalin followed the right path." End quote. U Nu then went on to advocate the following program. strengthen ties with Soviet Russia, confiscate all capitalist enterprises in Burma, abolish private ownership of land, form a league for the propagation of Marxist doctrine, and create a People's Democratic Army. Knowing what kind of political views were held by Yu Nu, we are now better able to appreciate the full impact of the following rather innocuous news item that appeared in the November 16, 1961 issue of the Burma Weekly Bulletin. Quote, before Burma became independent soon after the Second World War, U Thant entered the political field upon call by General Aung San and U Nu. On September the 1st, 1947, he was made Deputy Director of Press, Information Department. As a public servant, excuse me a second. Got a real froggy throat today, I'm not sure why. As a public servant, U Thant earned reputation and rapid promotion because of his ability, hard work, simpleness, and good nature. U Thant was promoted as secretary in the same ministry before becoming the Prime Minister's secretary on January 7, 1954. In the year 1952, U Thant went to the 7th session of the UN General Assembly as a member of the Burmese delegation. Since then, he has travelled widely and generally in the company of Prime Minister U Nu as a trusted advisor and friend. In March of 1962, U Nu was ousted by General Ne Win. This was hardly an anti-communist or anti-socialist coup. The new government merely speeded up the machinery which U Nu had set in motion. All commercial banks were taken over by the state, all private industry was declared illegal, and the entire economy was put under total state control. After Thant was elected Secretary General, he immediately began to exercise his special brand of Burmese impartiality. One has almost grown accustomed to the kind of headlines which appeared on the front page of the Chicago Tribune on December 3rd, 1962. Thant asks US to meet Reds at UN, chides West and Lords Nikita. Thant blasted the United States for resuming nuclear testing. Quote, a manifestation of a very dangerous psychosis, he called it. He said nothing about Russia's series of tests. It was U Thant who tried to tone down the UN resolution against the brutal Soviet suppression of Hungary. It was Thant who was so alarmed and disturbed over United States sanctions against communist Cuba and who proposed UN control posts in the Caribbean and in the United States to prevent an American invasion. After UN troops had conducted themselves like barbarians in the Congo, it was U Thant who sent them these accolades of praise. Their loyalty to the United Nations, their team spirit and comradeship have been an inspiration to all those who value the peacekeeping role of the UN. In truth, I have every reason to be proud of their discipline and their conduct. Since U Thant is the present Secretary General of the United Nations and is very much involved in what the organization does, let us enter one more piece of evidence into the record. Thant's views expressed in his own words. Speaking in 1958 before the annual meeting of the American Academy of Political and Social Science in Philadelphia, he said, quote, let me be candid. When American foreign policy did concern itself with what was happening in the rest of the world, it did so out of fear and suspicion, fear of communism and suspicion of communist motives. Fear and suspicion are very undesirable states of mind. They breed hatred, and hatred in turn breeds cruelty and intolerance. Fear of Soviet communism has led the United States and those who follow her lead to take a distorted view of the world situation and of the forces that are at work in modern society. The US policy toward China is unreal. It needs a thorough re-examination and reappraisal. The refusal of the United States to support the admission of China to the United Nations is based on two assumptions: that the Chinese government's behavior unfits it for membership in the World Organization, and that the Peiping government's grip on China may be broken at any moment. No one, however, believes this. It can be argued, however, that though the Soviet Union has not as yet attempted to impose its will on any state outside the communist cordon, The Soviet has had and still has the intention to do so whenever the circumstances are favorable. But it is very difficult to arrive at an objective appraisal of such suppositions. Suspicions are not proof, and it is doubtful whether any proof has been established to sustain this charge. If the above quotation does not speak for itself, there is little that could be added here to make it any plainer. When the Soviet demand for a troika was defeated at the United Nations, it was hailed as a great victory for the West. But was it? Or was it another one of those apparent Soviet defeats in which reality was a strategic victory for them? In this case, the communists were demanding that the single position of Secretary General be replaced by a group of 3 men. U Tant held out for the status quo. The status quo was maintained, but note the men that Tant appointed as his 2 principal assistants: G.P. Arkadev of the Soviet Union and Ralph Bunche of the United States. In reality, the Soviets did obtain their troika. In fact, they were so pleased with the arrangements that, in spite of all their fiery oratory to create the public impression that they were not getting their way, they never even bothered to introduce a formal proposal for their troika in either the Security Council or the General Assembly. It was all for propaganda value, nothing more. These, then, are the non-communists that Mr. Stevenson says keep the United Nations out of communist hands. The citizens of the world, who place loyalty to every nation above loyalty to their own native land. The neutral men who spend their lives advocating communist causes. Several years ago, Mr. Joseph Z. Kornfeder, a former member of the Communist Party, summarized all that we have been trying to demonstrate in this section of the book. His words deserve serious consideration by all Americans. Quote, "Now, as to the United Nations, if you were, let's say, a building engineer and someone were to show you a set of blueprints about a certain building, you would know from those blueprints how that building was going to look. Organization blueprints can be read the same way. I need not be a member of the United Nations Secretariat to know that the UN blueprint is a communist one. I was at the Moscow headquarters of the World Communist Party for nearly 3 years and was acquainted with most of the top leaders, and, of course, I was also a leading party worker. I went to their colleges. I learned their pattern of operations, and if I see that pattern in effect anywhere, I can recognize it. The UN idea was sold to us on the basis that a setup of that sort was needed to keep the peace in this world. Nothing was said about the UN being a world government in the making. I need waste no time about the UN peacekeeping qualities. With an aggressive communist world empire on the loose and sitting right inside the UN, that idea was definitely unrealistic in the first place. Unrealistic and disastrous as many of the New Deal's foreign policies. From the point of view of its master designers meeting at Dumbarton Oaks and Bretton Woods, and which included such masterful agents as Olga Hiss, Harry Dexter White, Lachlan Curry and others, the UN was and is not a failure. They and the Kremlin masterminds behind them never intended the UN as a peacekeeping organization. What they had in mind was a fancy and colossal Trojan horse under the wings of which their smaller agencies could more effectively operate. And in that they succeeded even beyond their expectations. The United Nations is the sole great survivor, the grand monument, as it were, to the greatest folly of all time, namely the illegitimate marriage between the New Deal and communism. Its internal setup, communist designed, is a pattern for sociological conquest, a pattern aimed to serve the purpose of communist penetration of the West. It is ingenious and deceptive." That is the end of chapter 10, and is the end of part 2. And coming up next, we have part 3, Psychological Warfare, United Nations Capture of the American Mind. What do you think? Similar. It's a great rounding off to the previous 3 chapters. It's why on Tuesday I hope to get all 4 chapters done. And they would have sat nicely in the same video, but we ran out of time and it was a bit ambitious to get 4 chapters done in one stream. But quite a revelation and an insight into the the characters, the first, what were they, Secretary Generals of the United Nations, Trygve Lie, and then those strange names, Utant. I'm just going to have a look. Trygve Lie, UN Secretary General. So he was in for looks like 6 years. First Secretary General Trygve Lie. Imagine putting a man in there whose last name was Lie. Oh, actually, it's pronounced Lee. That's what it says on Trygve Halvdan Lie. I guess that's because it's Norwegian, but it's still spelt Lie, isn't it? And then the next one you've got is Utant, and that is pronounced. That doesn't even say it. Oh, Utant. Okay, so I almost got that right. And so it says he was the third Secretary General, yeah, because he was kind of groomed by the guy before him. I thought it said Utant was the second, though. We got Trygve Lie. Oh, then we had Dag Hammarskjöld, then Utant. Utant was at it quite a while. Assumed office, left office. He was there till 1971. Kurt Waldheim took over. Then Javier Perez and a bunch of others. Boutros Ghali, Kofi Annan, Ban Ki-moon, Antonio Guterres. So, worth looking at the leanings, the circles that they swim in. Just because someone isn't a card-carrying communist doesn't mean they don't work to advance that ideology. And I think one of the points at the end there, that last quote that we read through on the last page, really made sense to me, because one of the big things that we learned through the reading of the Fabian Freeway book was that communism and socialism always leads to more bureaucracy. It always leads to these bloated, blobbish, kind of convoluted, Kafkaesque bureaucracies where nothing really makes sense and everyone lies to each other and pretends that it's all normal and works properly and makes sense to be doing what they're doing, because they're too scared to speak the truth and stand up and say, look, this is ridiculous. It's unnecessary. Nobody's doing any work. We're all just like filling out forms and double checking information on screen. Well, nowadays it's on screens, but it's all just, I call it pixel pushing. It's just busyness, not business. BUSYNESS, busyness, right? And it's just fake work. Nothing's getting produced. Nothing's getting done. That's how you know you're in a communist system, when all these people are engaged in fake work. You're not growing food. You're not creating and repairing clothes. You're not fixing and maintaining the mechanical vehicles that we're driving around in. You're not going out and repairing the roads and all this other stuff, all this actual stuff that needs to be getting done is not getting done, because so many people are just engaged in this fake busyness, pushing pixels around all day long, and then slapping themselves on the back and saying, oh yeah, I'm at work, I have a job. I'm a big boy with my big important job, earning my money, contributing. It's so, and that's, you know, the modern sort of reflection of what I think that quote was kind of getting at, is that you can see that this was a bloated bureaucracy, and that's what it always leads to, and that's the class that benefits from the system. This bloated bureaucracy, these bureaucrats, lifetime bureaucrats, don't want to do anything. They don't want to work. They don't want to like stick a shovel in the ground. They don't want to get that dirt under their fingernails. They don't want to produce anything that is beautiful or helpful or beneficial or nourishing to the human population. They just want to leech off the workers and the people who do like to do honest, decent work, and they just want to attach themselves to it, and it becomes this kind of like cancerous, malignant tumor on society, where all this resource, all this money is hoovered up and sent into this malignant tumor that just grows and grows and grows until it pops and then takes everybody, the whole organism, down with it, right? That's kind of the way I view this. So that's a beautiful image for you all to enjoy. Quick review of the chats. Rosemary Smith, good evening, says, all this information in books, but so few people understand what is happening or where it comes from. And LJ agrees with you, says she was just thinking the same. I know. That's why we read the books. That's why we listen to me reading the books. Or we buy them and read them ourselves. Or we spread links and we tell people about what we learned. It would, I think, be much better if more people knew the contents of these books. You know, I often think to myself, if you could click your fingers and have all the information in these books immediately transferred into your mind, into your memory, your consciousness, your awareness, right? Would you do it? I think the answer is yes. I think everyone on the planet would say yes. If you could download it Matrix style into your brain, boom, I know Kung Fu, right? Boom, I know the history of the Fabian socialists. You'd do it. Of course you would. Unfortunately, that technology doesn't exist, and I would caution people against signing up for it when it does exist, even though Elon Musk is working on it. But until that time, we've just got to read, right? Maybe you should just read. Right? That's why I put that in the theme music to the episode, to the show, is that this is our best chance we've got to get up to speed on what's going on and the things that have happened before, and the people who've done the investigation to put a book together so we can benefit from it. You know, there's a million other things out there that we could be doing, but a lot of it is bullshit and it's time wasting type of activities. It doesn't achieve anything. But you know, books and reading and learning from books and teaching other people what we've read and talking to them about it and bringing up Operation Rum Punch in a conversation when somebody's going on about the UN and the UN and sustainable development. I'm like, the UN, right? I mean, that organization that was founded by communists and ran by communists for the first 30 years of it, and maybe longer. I don't know. I haven't looked into that intervening, time between this book was when this was written and now. But I would say it's progressing in the way that you would expect. It's progressed in the way you would expect a communist-run organization to progress, in that it's got bigger and more powerful and more bloated and more unaccountable and more influential, with more tentacles and tendrils infecting the world's population and slowly wrapping around the neck of freedom-loving people, right? Necks, I should say, not the neck. It's not like we have a collective neck, the necks. But yeah, there you go. Heidi over on Rumble, please make your pixel-pushing bureaucracy explanation a clip. Thank you. I will do that. I'll make a note to do that. I like making clips. It's just really time-consuming. What are we about? That was about 1 hour 30. And anyone else, if you think of a bit that would be a nice clip, shoot me a message in the chat and just write the timestamp down, and then I can go back and make that into a nice little digestible clip that we can share around and hopefully drum up some enthusiasm for books and learning from books, because that's really what it's all about. Jackie K, good evening. Reminds me of when I worked in local government. I walked out of the job. Fair play, well played to you. I hats off to you for having the guts and the gusto and the strength of character to say, I'm better than this and I'm walking out on it. I really do appreciate that, because a lot of people don't have that and they think that they're not better. You know, we are all worthy of meaningful, important work, whatever form, shape that takes. We are all worthy of having something to do that is creative, that benefits other human beings, and to ask for value in return, and to find out what that is for ourselves, and not be given these petty, boring, pointless tasks that really achieve and add up to nothing in the end. Right? Mindhack says, life in the Matrix, indeed. Mr. Anderson, whose passport expires on the 11th of September 2001. Shame Anarchist says, notepad and pen at the ready, taking names and numbers. Nice one. Glad to hear that. Rosemary Smith says, people complaining about what is happening in their own area, but not the bigger picture. Yeah, that's good though. I mean, at least being aware of what's going on in your area is good, but the bigger picture explains why that's going on in your area, and you need to be able to bring that bigger picture to people's attention and link it to what's going on in your area to kind of make them care about it and to mount any sort of meaningful resistance, I would say. Gwen says, more Machiavellian. Yes, this Machiavellian is such a good word, and I'll say again, I think I said on Tuesday's video, but I watched Rise Above, and they had Sheep Farm, the guys from Sheep Farm on, and they used this phrase, Machiavellian parasites. And I think that's good. I would throw cowards in there as well, because I think they're very cowardly and spineless type. Even though they've got a plan and they work hard diligently and they're very intelligent and psychopathic and long-term thinking, they're still cowards, right? They're not doing it out in the open. They have to manipulate and steal people's free will by giving them this false reality through all the different media and modes and means of communication that we get it. So I think they're cowards as well as Machiavellian. They're also psychopaths. There's many, many more words as well, but I won't bring the tone down. Celine Lyon says, sorry, Nick, late again. You are forgiven. No problem. Nice to have you here. Cool. I think that's it for comments, which means we shall continue onward. This is proving to be a good book, and I'm enjoying it very much. Shamanarchist says, have a look at the registration plate on Franz Ferdinand's car the day he got assassinated. That sounds really interesting. I'm not going to do that right now, but I'll make a note to do that. Just as a total side tangent, did you know, I don't know where you're based, but if you're based in the UK, you know there's a band called Franz Ferdinand. And you know there's also another band called Trivium, sorry. And I often think, and you know, there's actors who have the same name as, for example, whistleblowers. I often think that I wonder if this is done by design so that when people go looking up for something, they find something else instead, right? So if you search Trivium, the first thing you're going to find is this like death metal, intense, screamy kind of like hardcore rock music. And then you're going to be like, ugh. You know, and you might never discover this lost tool of learning, this classical way of learning anything, the trivium, right? And the same would be Franz Ferdinand. You go and investigate, the causes of, you know, World War One. Franz Ferdinand, who was he? And you get this band kind of singing the song "Take Me Out," and you get like sidetracked. And I often wonder about this, if this is done by design and deliberate, and it's just adding another unnecessary layer to the onion of trying to of what is going on, and just to confuse things a little bit, just to muddy the water. Because there's more examples. They're the only two I can think of off the top of my head, but. Yeah, you just reminded me of that, and I haven't mentioned that idea before. So keep an eye out for things like that. It's quite fun to spot those sorts of things and make those connections and see how things sort of breadcrumbs are put there with like smoke screens put in front of them as well. So Anticoviat, hello Anticoviat, welcome. You say A11118. That's the license plate. 118118. I'm not sure what the significance of A11118 is. Rosemary Smith says, religious people knocked on my door. I could not shut my mouth about things. One of them knew what I was speaking about, but the other one attacked me verbally. But they are coming back Saturday. I'm ready. Rosemary Smith, I don't know if you were here earlier in the call, but I put this link in the chat, and it's a 3-part course on how to deal with the situation that you were just sort of describing there, the one who ended up attacking you verbally. This 3-part course is really invaluable. It's a few hours worth of study, but I put it out there to help people like us who tend to get into difficult conversations with people when we're trying to say the United Nations is communist. You know, what can happen is we can find ourselves, we're trying to communicate on a level that is not being met by the person we're speaking to, and we're on different levels, and this makes communication impossible. And so the course is all about identifying when that's happened and correcting it and doing something about it immediately, so you don't lose precious time, you don't waste precious energy, and you don't spin your wheels fruitlessly, right? And I think it's a really powerful framework to apply to all our interactions, whether they're work, personal, whatever, to make sure we get the most out of those interactions, and we can hone in on the people who are worth interacting with and the people who you can just write off and stop talking to, or the people who you keep it very surface level, talk about the weather and sports ball and, you know, what was on TV and those sorts of topics. It's a really good framework. I found it very, very good. So I just chuck that back in the chat for people on YouTube. Anti-COVID, it's all a stage show. Yes. People's pantomime. Wicked. I think that is it. I think it's about time to get back on with the book, as they say over in Ireland. Is that right, Frank? Book? Oh, I've just given away what country you live in. Sorry. Oh, maybe it's not Ireland where they say that. Maybe it's Northern England, Northwest England. I might be getting my accents mixed up. Hang on a sec. Right, I'll just have a sip and then we'll get in. Okay. So this is really becoming quite overwhelming. The thesis being that the UN is, I don't know if we can say it is a communist organization, but it was certainly sympathetic to communism, set up by communists, infiltrated by communists, and at least partially under the control of communists, right? That, I think the book is making that much clear. I do want to read some of the books that he's referring to. So I think I managed to get a copy of Trygve Lee's book. And also that Frank just reminds me that you helped me with the pronunciation of Yutan. I was mispronouncing that, wasn't I? Well, I'll just say thank you. I can't see it now. Oh, there, Utant. There we go. Utant. Thank you for that pronunciation. I'd never seen that or heard that name, I don't think. Utant. Strange name. Okay, Utant. So thank you for that. But yeah, it seems very obvious that there was incredible overlap between communists, communist sympathizers, socialists, and the people involved in the setting up of the UN. Has it changed? I would argue no, because I don't think the goal of communism, which is a one world system of communist government, ever went away. That was made pretty clear in the Fabian Freeway book, and how gradualism is the means by which to bring it about. You've also got the investigation into the American foundations, which turned up an admission that the goal was to merge the American system with the Soviet system. Okay, so I think there's a very good case that the UN is a communist organization. It's looking that way anyway. But let's crack on with another chapter. This is going to be part 3, Psychological Warfare, United Nations Capture of the American Mind. And a great title. Oh, and this actually reminds me, this should be a good point to say that I've got a conversation coming up with Melissa from Cutting Through the Matrix, and we're going to be discussing the book Animal Farm. That's the plan. So that is in the pipeline. We haven't recorded it yet, so it's a bit of a ways off, but I thought I would mention it there as a little teaser. If you don't know Melissa, she is running the I think BitChute, YouTube, Rumble channels, where she posts Alan Watts' work, reduxes, and repeats of his many excellent talks. And that is CTTM, and then the name Alan Watt. And you will find that. I'm gonna stick that in the chat because it's Alan Watt. His talks are very close to, near and dear to my heart. There's also a book club where we are currently working our way through Tragedy and Hope. That's a wonderful group and of people to be part of as well. And yeah, just while that name comes up, Animal Farm. I just thought I would put a teaser out there, and I'm going to be talking to Melissa about that book. So watch this space, and I will be sure to let you all know when that conversation is dropped. I'm very much looking forward to it. It's going to be an honor and a privilege to speak with Melissa, and I'm sure it'll be a fruitful discussion to get out into the world. So yeah, check out her channels. She puts up wonderful interviews. She adds introductions to Alan's talks. Alan sadly is no longer with us. He has died, but she adds introductions and outros to his talks, which connect them to the present day. But his work is evergreen, timeless in many ways, and he has a wonderful lilting Scottish accent. And if you dig around hard enough on the websites, you can even find some of his excellent guitar playing, which really puts mine to shame. But it was a wonderful kind of, what do you call it? Renaissance man, I would say. And put out a lot of very vitally important evergreen talks and lectures, and not lectures really, more like talks, which I think have probably helped keep a lot of people sane, myself included. So that's coming up. Little plug and glimpse into what is coming down the Hayes Reviews pipeline for you there. But anyway, onward. So we're kicking off this chapter with a quote from Adlai Stevenson from March the 2nd, 1961. Quote, "On a dark scene, in a dark time of troubles, New York's guest, the UN, is proclaiming, by deed as well as word, that men can live not by violence and brute strength, but at last by reason and law." So who could complain against reason and law, right? Chapter 11, Animal Farm. Some years ago, George Orwell wrote a brilliant satire on 20th century collectivism entitled Animal Farm. It is the story of a revolution staged by the animals on Farmer Jones's place. The animals considered themselves workers being exploited by non-productive humans, the capitalists. They reasoned that once the entire farm was turned over to the workers, they would all live better and not have to work so hard. As with all revolutions, there were leaders and there were followers, mostly the latter. On Animal Farm, the leadership was cheerfully provided by the pigs, who hastened to point out that they were, through no fault of the others, a little smarter than the rest. One of the first official acts of the new regime was to draft a statement of 7 great principles, which were then painted on the back wall of the barn for all to see. These principles became the basis of the new order and were designed to protect the animals from any future injustice or infringement on their rights. There were such noble pronouncements as, quote, "No animal shall drink alcoholic beverages," "No animal shall sleep in a bed," and "No animal shall kill another animal." But the greatest and wisest of all was the 7th great principle, which read, "All animals are equal." As the months slowly turned into years, however, things did not turn out quite the way the workers had expected. They were working twice as hard and eating half as well as they had when they were exploited by Farmer Jones. The one significant exception, of course, was the ruling clique of pigs, who were now living very well indeed. In fact, they had moved right into Jones's house, where they had been seen drinking Jones's ale and sleeping in Jones's bed. When the puzzled workers went to the rear of the barn to see if there was not something in the 7 great principles prohibiting this kind of conduct, they found that a few changes had been made. No animal shall drink alcoholic beverages to excess. No animal shall sleep in a bed with sheets. Even the important 6th principle now read, "No animal shall kill another animal without cause." But by far the worst shock came when the poor creatures turned with hope to the 7th and greatest of all the principles, which now declared, "All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others." Spoiler alert if you haven't read the book. In this allegory, Orwell has exposed one of the universal devices of demagoguery, the use of high-sounding phrases to appeal to the noble aspirations of well-intentioned but unenlightened followers. It has been used with success from the very beginning of recorded history, but the device has been expanded and refined during recent years to the point where it is now perhaps the most important single item in the communist bag of tricks. Without the appearance of being motivated by noble causes, the communist conspiracy would have collapsed long ago. For example, Article 4 of the Soviet Constitution calls for the abolition of exploitation of man by man. Nothing is said about the exploitation of man by government. Communism is generally thought to be based on the doctrine from each according to his ability to each according to his need. However, Article 12 of the Soviet Constitution says, work in the USSR is a duty and a matter of honor for every able-bodied citizen in accordance with the principle, he who does not work, neither shall he eat. From each according to his ability, to each according to his work. Article 124 of the Soviet Constitution speaks of freedom of religion, but Article 122 of the Soviet Penal Code makes it a crime to teach religion to small children. In other words, it is recognized that everyone has freedom of religion except as provided by law, and the Soviets have such a law. Article 103 of the Soviet Constitution states, quote, in all courts, cases are tried with the participation of people's assessors, except in cases specially provided for by law. Article 111 states, in all courts of the USSR, cases are heard in public unless otherwise provided for by law. This, except as provided by law gimmick, is at the heart of practically all the high-sounding phrases which constitute UN declarations, covenants, and conventions. If we read these phrases rapidly, listening to them only with our emotions, we will find in them expressions of man's noblest aspirations. But if we read them with just half as much care as we would a sales contract, they will fall apart under the sheer weight of their own demagoguery. For example, Article 14 of the United Nations Covenant on Human Rights begins with the statement, everyone shall have the right to freedom of expression. A little further along, however, we find, but it carries with it special duties and responsibilities, and is therefore subject to certain penalties, liabilities, and restrictions as are provided by law. Article 15, Section 3 says, freedom to manifest one's religion or beliefs may be subject only to such limitations as are prescribed by law. Article 19 promises liberty of opinion and then cancels it immediately by stating that it may be subject to certain unspecified restrictions as provided by law. Article 20 states, the right of peaceful assembly shall be recognized. No restriction may be placed on the exercise of this right other than those imposed in conformity with the law. In fact, every single right outlined in the United Nations Covenant on Human Rights may be legally denied if, in the opinion of the politicians, it is necessary to protect national security or public order, or public safety or public health, or public morals, or the rights, freedoms, or reputations of others. What better excuse could any tyrant hope for? Most wars and national crimes are committed in the name of one of these. In the reign of terror in France during the 1789 Revolution, unspeakable atrocities were perpetrated in the name of the Committee of Public Safety. Hitler did the same in the name of national security. The United Nations followed suit in Katanga in the name of restoring public order. No animal shall kill another animal without cause. What a far cry this is from the American Constitution, which says that Congress shall pass no law abridging the people's right of free speech, religion, peaceful assembly, and so forth. Not except as provided by law, but no law. What a difference this makes. According to Marxist doctrine, a human being is primarily an economic creature. In other words, his material well-being is all important. His privacy and his freedom are strictly secondary considerations. The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights clearly reflects this philosophy in its emphasis on social security, food, clothing, housing, medical care, unemployment compensation. In this connection, the UN Declaration closely parallels the Soviet Constitution. The following comparison should be studied carefully. So, Soviet Constitution, we have Article 118, Citizens of the USSR have the right to work. And the United Nations Declaration, Article 23, says everyone has the right to work. Okay, on the Soviet Constitution, we've got citizens of the USSR have the right to maintenance in old age and also in case of sickness or disability. This right is ensured by the extensive development of social insurance of industrial, office, and professional workers at state expense, free medical service for the working people, and the provision of a wide network of health resorts for the use of the working people. And then on the UN Declaration, it says, everyone has the right to medical care and necessary social services, and the right to security in the event of unemployment, sickness, disability, widowhood, old age, or other lack of livelihood. So this is incredible similarities here. The Soviet Constitution says citizens of the USSR have the right to rest and leisure, and the UN Declaration says everyone has the right to rest and leisure. Soviet Constitution says citizens of the USSR are guaranteed the right to unite in trade unions, and the UN Declaration says everyone has the right to join trade unions. So a lot of parallels. There are a great many other similarities between the Soviet Constitution and the United Nations Declaration of Human Rights, but the foregoing comparison is sufficient to reveal a common inspiration. The basic concept embodied in both of these documents is that the government has full responsibility for the welfare of the people and, in order to discharge that responsibility, must assume control of all their activities. How different this is from the traditional American concept of limited government. It is significant that in actuality the Russian people have few of the rights guaranteed to them in their constitution, while the American people have them in abundance even though they are not guaranteed. The reason, of course, is that material gain and economic security cannot be guaranteed by any government. They are the reward of hard work and industrious production. Unless the people produce one loaf of bread for each citizen, the government cannot guarantee that each will have one loaf to eat. Constitutions can be written, laws can be passed, but unless the bread is produced, it can never be distributed. As Benjamin Franklin put it, an empty bag cannot stand upright. Why then do Americans bake more bread, manufacture more shoes, and assemble more TV sets than Russians? They do so precisely because our government does not guarantee these things. If it did, there would be so many accompanying taxes, control, regulations, and political manipulations that the productive genius that is America's would be reduced to the floundering level of waste and inefficiency now found behind the Iron Curtain. It's a really good point. If Americans ever reach the point where the government is powerful enough to give them all they want, they will find that they also have a government powerful enough to take from them all that they have. In 1801, Thomas Jefferson said, quote, "With all these blessings, what more is necessary to make us happy and a prosperous people? Still one thing more, fellow citizens, a wise and frugal government which shall restrain men from injuring one another, shall leave them otherwise free to regulate their own pursuits of industry and improvement, and shall not take from the mouth of labour the bread it has earned." The principle behind this American philosophy can be reduced to a rather simple formula. 1. Economic security for all is impossible without widespread abundance. 2. Abundance is impossible without industrious and efficient production. 3. Such production is impossible without energetic, willing, and eager labour. 4. This is not possible without incentive. 5. Of all forms of incentive, fear, altruism, and material compensation, the most sustaining and productive for most people is material compensation. 6. This profit motive diminishes as government controls, regulations, and taxes increase to deny the fruits of success to those who produce. 7. Therefore, any attempt to artificially create or redistribute economic security through governmental intervention can only result in eventually destroying the productive base of society, without which real security for more than the ruling elite is quite impossible. That's definitely worth tabbing, I would say. a good bit of logic, and a nice sort of 7-point argument to bring to people's awareness who are kind of in support of communism, socialism, and these other systems of wealth redistribution, because the one thing they always have in common is government, more taxation, more top-down control, more for the few and less for the many. That's what always happens. That's what always ends up happening. I'm struggling to get this tab straight. There we go. Really itchy nose for some reason. All right, let's crack on with this. On the surface, this may sound heartless and unmindful of the needs of those less fortunate individuals who are found in any society. What about the lame, the sick, and the destitute? Is an often voiced question. Every other country in the world has confused real charity with the giving of other people's money, and has attempted to use the power of government to meet this need. Yet, in every one of these cases, the improvement has been marginal at best and has resulted, in the long run, in more misery, more poverty, and certainly less freedom than when government first stepped in. By comparison, America has traditionally followed Jefferson's advice of relying on individual action and charity and of keeping the hand of government out of such matters. The result is that the United States has fewer cases of genuine hardship per capita than any other country in the entire world or throughout all history. Even during the Depression of the 1930s, Americans ate and lived better than most people in other countries today. In the United Nations concept, even those rights not related to material things such as freedom of religion and speech are presumed to be granted by government. In America, government cannot grant rights for the simple reason that they are presumed to be God-given. The Declaration of Independence says that men are endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. Our Bill of Rights does not pretend to grant rights. It is merely a list of restrictions and limitations on government to make sure that no future government officials will ever violate the God-given rights of each citizen. The United Nations Declaration of Human Rights also refers to these as inalienable, but the articles themselves clearly reveal that such words are quite meaningless and serve only as window dressing. This is by no means an insignificant distinction. If we accept the premise that human rights are granted by government, then we must be willing to accept the corollary that they properly can be denied by government. Few Americans would be willing to accept this premise if they took the time to think it through. Yet that is exactly the premise upon which the United Nations is building its world government and under which all Americans may someday have to live. There is still another and even more important reason why the distinction between God-given and government-given rights is important. It lies at the very center of the present gigantic struggle between the forces of freedom and the forces of slavery. To overlook this factor is to miss the dominant meaning of the whole contest. Atheism is the basic tenet of communism. If even the possibility of God is accepted, the entire superstructure of communist ideology crashes into a heap of contradictions and absurdities. Conversely, an acknowledgement of dependence on God is the basic tenet of Americanism, recent Supreme Court decisions notwithstanding. As George Washington said in his farewell address in 1796, quote, "Of all the dispositions and habits which lead to political prosperity, religion and morality are indispensable supports. Let it simply be asked, where is the security for property, for reputation, for life, if the sense of religious obligation desert the oaths which are the instruments of investigation in courts of justice? And let us with caution indulge the supposition that morality can be maintained without religion. Whatever may be conceded to the influence of refined education on minds of peculiar structure, reason and experience both forbid us to expect that national morality can prevail in exclusion of religious principles." It should be no comfort to Americans that the United Nations has elected to adopt the communist approach to this most basic issue. During the final United Nations debate on the Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, the representative from the Netherlands rose and said, "I only want to stress one particular aspect which, to our great regret, has not obtained due recognition in this document. I am referring to the origin of these rights. The fact that man's rights and freedoms are based on his divine origin and immortal destiny, the fact that there is a supreme being who is the fount of these rights, increase their value and importance. To ignore this relation would mean the same thing as breaking a plant from its roots or building a house and forgetting its foundations. It is to our everlasting shame that the United States delegation remained silent on this matter. The communist master planners have seen to it that nowhere in the Charter, in the covenants, in the declarations, or anywhere else does the United Nations grant even the slightest acknowledgement of God. To create an acceptable public image, the meetings are opened each day not with silent prayer, but with a minute of silence. The choice of terms is precise and deliberate. In the legislative chambers in Washington, one can find a chapel for the use of our elected representatives in seeking divine guidance in their work. At United Nations headquarters, we find instead a huge statue of the mythological Greek god Zeus, who was known for his ferocity and cruelty. Rather than a chapel, there is a meditation room, the inside of which resembles a nightmarish cross between an ancient pagan temple and a Picasso modern art exhibit. Completely devoid of religious symbols, there is only a lighted panel of bizarre geometric design, a few oriental benches, and a huge block of polished iron ore under a small shaft of light from the darkened ceiling. And I think there is a picture of that, if I'm not mistaken. We'll pull that up. The UN meditation room. I've seen pictures of it. There's quite a lot of pictures of that online. It's not hard to find. But he's really on the money now. He's really getting into... I thought there was a picture in here. Maybe not. He's really getting into some of the core key issues now. Yeah, I can't find that picture. Maybe it's elsewhere in the book. Oh, yeah. Wow, there's actually a lot of pictures in here that I didn't realize how many there are. There you go. Ladies and gents. That is the room that is the spirit that encompasses and communicates the spiritual side, the spiritual place from which the UN is coming. A block of iron ore, a hideous painting, and a couple of benches. I like Ed Griffin's description. It's a cross between an ancient pagan temple and a Picasso modern art exhibit. I mean, I've been on holiday this year. I went to Exeter Cathedral and I went to St. Paul's in London. And those places had some stuff going on. I mean, they were amazing. I could spend the whole day there. The organ was on. There was a choir in St. Paul's. You could understand how that would lift up the spirit and point it towards God and get people thinking about God and the goodness and the graciousness and the gift of life that we have thanks to our Creator. What does this inspire? This just inspires like shivers, like ugh, that kind of like gross shiver that you get when something makes you cringe or uncomfortable. All right, continuing. There are two ways of legally denying the rights of citizens. One is to write into the law certain escape clauses, prolific qualifications, and vague terminology, which can later be interpreted any way the politicians desire. The second way is far simpler. The assumption is merely that rights do not exist and no reference is made to them in the first place. The United Nations knows all about this second approach, as the following clearly reveals. Abraham Lincoln said, quote, Property is the fruit of labor. Property is desirable. It is a positive good in the world. That some should be rich shows that others may become rich, and hence is just encouragement to industry and enterprise. The Communist Manifesto, on the other hand, says, quote, "The theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property." It seems strange, then, that the communist master planners should have allowed Article 17 of the UN Declaration of Human Rights to mention specifically the right to own property. Does it not seem likely that the communists would delete this provision? The answer is that this is precisely what they have done. Reference has been made to both the Declaration and the Covenants when talking about United Nations pronouncements on human rights. The Declaration is a broad outline of principle, a public statement of, let me zoom out a bit, of good intentions. It has no other meaning. The Covenants, on the other hand, correspond to legislation and would, if ratified by the member nations, become legally binding upon us. They would completely override and replace our own Bill of Rights. It is not surprising, therefore, to discover that there is often quite a substantial difference between the wording of the Declaration of Human Rights and the draft Covenants on Human Rights. The sweet-sounding, vague terminology of the Declaration has been replaced by far more precise and enforceable language in the Covenants. But in the case of the right to own property, the provision which appeared in the Declaration vanished altogether in the Covenant. Dr. Charles Malik of Lebanon was the chairman of the United Nations Human Rights Commission. Writing in the United Nations Bulletin of September 1st, 1952, he said, quote, "I think a study of our proceedings will reveal the amendments we adopted to the old text under examination responded, for the most part, more to Soviet than to Western promptings. The concept of property and its ownership is at the heart of the ideological conflict of the present day. It was not only the communist representatives who riddled this concept with questions and doubts. A goodly portion of the non-communist world had itself succumbed to these doubts. A study of this particular debate will reveal the extent to which the non-communist world has been communistically softened or frightened." He further stated that a quiet revolution had occurred, with the emphasis shifting with a vengeance from personal liberty to the adequate standard of living. It was 9 years later, after this trend had gone even further, that United States Ambassador Adlai Stevenson said, "The United Nations, as an idea and as an institution, is an extension of Western ideas, of Western belief in the worth and dignity of the individual, of Western ideology. It is based on a Western parliamentary tradition. Its roots are in the Western ideal of representative government. When one stops to consider the philosophical foundation of the UN, it is easier to understand why Premier Khrushchev pounds the desk in frustration." That sound you just heard was George Washington and Thomas Jefferson turning over in their graves. In 1948, the United Nations Subcommittee on Information and of the Press issued a proposed international convention supposedly to protect the right to seek, receive, and impart information by word of mouth and by publication. It then proceeded to state that government has the right to impose penalties, liabilities, and restrictions, as well as the right of correction, whenever it felt that news had been reported falsely. More recently, the preamble of the United Nations Convention on Freedom of Information was altered to contain this significant qualification: freedom of information, an opinion accurate, objective, and comprehensive. An excellent example of the kind of freedom of information the world could expect under future United Nations management was provided at a meeting of psychiatrists and scientific authorities held under the auspices of the UN World Health Organization in November 1957. This group discussed the deplorable free and public discussion among scientists of questions which are controversial. They declared, quote, "The publicizing of disagreements and contradictions among scientists, for example, about polio vaccine or the cancer-producing effects of tobacco, has contributed to public mistrust of scientists and has caused science to lose the infallibility with which it was credited in the 19th century. What kind of information would United Nations officials decide is accurate, objective, and comprehensive? Connor Cruz O'Brien gave us a hint when he wrote, quote, I referred UN headquarters to statements which I had indeed made during the fighting in Katanga, but in the latter days of it, when it had already been impressed on me by the telegrams from Leopoldville that talk about ending the secession was frowned on. These statements were naturally more guarded and nuanced than my first statements. I also referred them to an interview I had given Keith Kyle for the BBC. Chieri, a UN official who was in Elizabethville at the time, asked whether it was an orthodox interview, and smiled, the smile of a man who knows that all official versions have been from the beginning of time, and will forever be worded to deceive the enemy and appease the clamour of the ignorant. And if there is any lingering doubt as to what the United Nations has in mind when it says it may impose penalties, liabilities, and restrictions on the right to transmit information, ponder the following news item that appeared in the New York Times during the United Nations December 1961 attack on Katanga. Quote, asked why a UN jet attacked the post office in Elizabethville with rockets yesterday, General McKeown replied that the airstrike had been ordered because the building had been used to transmit anti-United Nations propaganda. If it were not so tragically serious, the following extracts taken from a recent issue of the United Nations Review would certainly be good for a laugh. Quote, a United Nations Regional Human Rights Seminar was held in Canberra from April the 29th to May the 13th. Several speakers termed wiretapping a dirty business, and the seminar agreed that it was a serious infringement on human rights. In particular, the right to privacy, indiscriminate and uncontrolled wiretapping was unanimously condemned. Apparently, discriminate and controlled wiretapping is not objectionable. Wiretapping for criminal investigations should be permitted only by law and only to combat particularly heinous crimes committed so clandestinely that such a practice was absolutely necessary. A majority at the seminar agreed that national compulsory fingerprinting of all citizens did not infringe any human rights. The seminar view was taken that human rights could not be violated when action was taken for the good of all. Well, that is from the United Nations Review, June 1963. That's quite a staggering one right there, that little bit. The human rights could not be violated when action was taken for the good of all. For the greater good, as I was saying. This is collectivism. This is where individual rights are trumped by the rights of the collective, of the greater good, of the all, of the good, for the good of all, right? So we've got to kick your door down and murder your dog and kick you out of the country because it's for the good of all. We have to commit acts of war for the good of all. So pretty sick stuff. Since the United Nations claims that one of its purposes is to put an end to aggression, it is interesting to note the United Nations definition of aggression. At the 5th session of the General Assembly in 1950, the International Law Commission inserted a paragraph into the draft Code of Offences against the peace and security of mankind, which declared the following as the UN definition of aggression. Quote, the employment by the authorities of a state of armed force against another state for any purpose other than national or collective self-defense, or in pursuance of a decision or recommendation by a competent organ of the United Nations. Let me read that again. That's kind of wordy. So this is the United Nations definition of aggression. The employment by the authorities of a state of armed force against another state for any purpose other than national or collective self-defense, or in pursuance of a decision or recommendation by a competent organ of the United Nations. Just bear with me a second. Just chew on that quote for a second. I'll be right back. I gotta blow my nose. I'm getting a bit itchy. Okay, I'm back. That is done. Quite wordy, but I think pretty clear what the UN is getting at with that definition. In other words, if it is a UN military action, such as in Katanga, it simply cannot be considered aggression. And you can tell, as I pointed out, reading the Wikipedia article at the start of this stream, they don't word it as aggression. They have all these other kind of bureaucratic, sort of politically correct, vague words that they use to dress it up and hide it. And it's just the work of cowards, isn't it? During the attempted communist takeover of Greece in 1948, the Soviet satellites bordering on the north abducted approximately 25,000 Greek children. The children were never returned to their parents, and they have since grown to adulthood. Wow. Many of them not even aware of their national origin. What the heck? That's insane. Yet a few years later, delegates from all over the world traveled to communist Poland for a UN seminar on the rights of the child, and with the participation of representatives from communist countries, they piously drafted the Declaration of the Rights of the Child. Adopted by the General Assembly in 1960, the Declaration provides that the child must be protected not only from all forms of neglect, cruelty, and exploitation, but also from practices which may foster, quote, religious or other forms of discrimination. This would authorize the United Nations to dictate to parents everywhere, including America, how they may raise their own children. Well, that has definitely happened in the intervening 60 years. That's going on to this very day. I was saying on another stream, I think it was on the last book, or it might have been earlier in this series, how a colleague of mine was talking to me about, I think it was on The Next Million Years, but she was telling me about how much you've got to pay the government here if you take your child out of school and take them on holiday. When during term time, you get fined, and you get fined per parent per child. So if you have 2 children and you live at home with your partner, then you get fined 4 times effectively, twice each. It's just crazy. That quote would be a good short. Thank you, LJ. Where are we at? This is 229. All right, 2. Nice one. Totally lost my place now. Oh, yeah. After all, any parent who inculcates in his child a reverence for a particular religion is discriminating against all other religions. The only way to avoid religious discrimination in rearing children is to teach them none at all. And so it goes. The master planners and their unsuspecting helpers have been busy for years concocting poisonous pills with candy coating and offering them to the American public as the elixir for human suffering. They have covered every possible sphere of man's activities. There is a genocide convention, a declaration of the rights of women, and even proposals for legislation to protect the rights of animals. And lest anyone take these great principles too seriously and make the fatal mistake of believing that they are any different from the ones painted and on the barn in Orwell's Animal Farm, let them examine the record. The United Nations Charter says, quote, membership in the United Nations is open to other peace-loving states which accept the obligations contained in the present Charter and in the judgment of the organization, are able and willing to carry out these obligations. Yet the greatest peace-destroying force the world has ever seen sits in its tribunals and commands the unquestioning acceptance and respect of all other members. The preamble to the Charter states, quote, we, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the applications arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained. But Russia continues to violate every agreement she enters into. When, in violation of one such treaty, she builds a wall through the center of Berlin, denies access to the western sector, and murders in cold blood scores of civilians trying to escape over the wall, the United Nations says nothing. In 1952, the Free Trade Union Committee of the AFL brought to the attention of the UN the fact that the communists in Red China had committed between 14 and 20 million political murders. Wow. The United Nations listened but took no action. It was apparently too busy drafting the Code of Offences against the peace and security of man to be much concerned with 20 million murders. In 1953, the United Nations Economic and Social Council was asked to discuss the rise of slave labour in the USSR. The Council would not discuss the matter and removed it from the agenda. When Red China conquered the independent nation of Tibet, set about systematically destroying its race and its culture, and proceeded to murder over 50,000 Buddhists, the United Nations looked the other way. Years afterward, it passed a vague resolution which started off by praising the principles of its own charter and then called for, quote, respect for the fundamental human rights of the Tibetan people and for their distinctive cultural and religious life. The resolution did not even mention the name of the aggressor. When Soviet tanks moved in to crush the Hungarian Revolution, the UN suddenly ceased its talk about self-determination, anti-colonialism, and the peace and security of man. As a matter of fact, throughout the bloodbath, the Hungarian delegates from the communist regime continued to attend United Nations meetings, to vote, and to enjoy all the respect and privileges of membership without one word of protest from the other countries. When the UN committee, which had investigated the communist suppression of freedom in Hungary, finally submitted its report to the General Assembly, the United Nations was suddenly too busy to consider it. When the item came up on the 1960 agenda, we find the following official explanation of what happened. Quote, the press of other business prevented the Assembly's consideration of the item on Hungary. End quote. As the Wall Street Journal editorialized on September 19, 1960, quote, abdication of the UN's professed moral purpose is looming. It follows logically from the prevailing double standard at the UN, which indicted the West for Suez and Lebanon, but was indifferent to the communist rape of Tibet and Hungary. The United Nations has always loudly professed the right of self-determination as a basic right. The Charter proclaims, quote, respect for the principles of equal rights and self-determination, end quote. In 1955, the Social Commission of UNESCO declared, quote, all peoples and all nations shall have the right of self-determination, namely, the right freely to determine their political, economic and cultural status, end quote. But when anti-communist Katanga applied for some of that self-determination, the UN suddenly ran out. Or did it? At the very time it was denying this right to Katanga, the United Nations admitted communist-controlled Outer Mongolia to the ranks of peace-loving nations. It recognized Syria's independence and admitted it to the UN, where it seceded from the United Arab Republic. It did the same when Senegal broke away from the Mali Federation, Pakistan from India, Sudan from Egypt. While the United Nations was insisting that the Congo could not function economically without Katanga, it cut up an area about 1/10 the size of Katanga and created two whole new nations, the Kingdom of Rwanda and the Republic of Burundi. At the very time that the Security Council was condemning Portugal for defending its citizens against communist-inspired atrocities in Portuguese Angola, it refused to take any action whatsoever in a clear-cut case of unprovoked aggression against Portuguese Goa by pro-communist Nehru of India. All animals may be equal, but some are, obviously, more equal than others. The list is endless. The United Nations actions speak so much louder than its words that one can only wonder in amazement at the number of otherwise observant Americans who have fallen for all its propagandizing about human rights. But the above item regarding Nehru suggests a good place to end this part of the story. The London Daily Telegraph a few years ago reported that a young recruit in India's army was asked during a written examination to define fundamental rights. His answer? Big rules done by the great people like Lenin, Nehru, and Karl Marx. And that is the end of chapter 11. We are making very good progress. We're over halfway now. And page 139, we've got about 100 pages left, which I think is going to be 3 more videos. Yeah, probably about 3 more videos left, I would think. What do you think about that last bit? Just going to move my mic and get comfy. Heidi over on Rumble drops a comment in and says, concerning the good of all, Judas cared about the poor as an abstraction, never about a homeless person in the street, just a thought. That's it, isn't it? It reminds me very much of what I'm constantly saying. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. You know, a lot of people will step over that homeless person in the street, not stop to talk to them or ask them if they need anything, or buy them a drink, or buy them a, I don't know, cheese and onion pie or something. A lot of people will walk past, pretend they're not there, ignore them, avert their eyes, and yet they'll think of themselves as a good person, and they'll be like, "Oh, I'm good. I give money to charity, and that means I'm a good person because I give £5 a month to some charity, which is probably going into the CEO's pocket." You know, so I mean, yeah, that's a great observation, Heidi. A good thought to add. This ideology always appeals to people who want to see good outcomes. So this is how insidious it is, because it ensnares and pulls in good people. And of course, people who get ensnared by it and devote large chunks of their time and their life to it, they don't want to be made a fool of. They don't want to backtrack. They don't want to admit that they've been hoodwinked and bamboozled, because nobody likes to say, "Oh, do you know what? I was totally scammed at there." And nobody likes to say, "I was wrong." Nobody likes to say, "I'm sorry." Hardest words in the English language to say, aren't they? So that's why it's so insidious. But we got a bunch of comments here on YouTube. What is going on? So with regards to the meditation room at the UN headquarters, people are saying that's a Saturnian cube with schizoid embolism, says Shamanist. I think that's a good summary there. Anticoviat says energetic resonance, like the Denver airport, says Mindhack. Yeah, the Denver airport has some very weird things going on. Frank Lennon says Arthur C. Clarke's monolithic in the UN Theosophic Room, iron ore, right. That's a good observation, actually, the monolith, because the building itself looks like a big monolith, doesn't it? It's on the postcard. So this is the postcard that I got with the bundle that came with the book. So the building itself looks like a monolith. And then within the monolith, you have like another little monolith. I don't know if I can fit those on the camera at the same time, but you got, like, you see, it's a monolith inside, and then in the meditation room, the supposed spiritual center, the place where you go for reflection on spiritual matters, it's another monolith. So it's quite an interesting macro and micro relationship going on there, a sort of as above, so below type thing, right? But yeah, the monolith, the relevance is the film 2001: Space Odyssey. Arthur C. Clarke and Stanley Kubrick co-created that. Begins with a monolith, and the monolith, I don't know if it ends with the monolith, but the monolith pops up all the way through it, and very key moments, and I think advances the evolution of the human species each time it appears, or something like that. I don't know. I haven't dived too deep into Kubrick. Bit of a discussion on Arthur C. Clarke. Crowleyite, nonce. 2 words that pop out there. I can neither confirm nor deny those accusations. I do not know. But certainly must have been into the occult in some way, right? And he and Kubrick were close friends, says Shame Anarchist. Yeah, that's what led to their collaboration on 2001 Space Odyssey, wasn't it? LJ says he had a TV program called Mysterious Worlds that she enjoyed. Rosemary says, I will never deny my God and I will keep my soul at any cost. Wise words. Very good. Mindhack says, both the new Matrix movie and the Avengers movie had a Lucifer statue. Oh, I missed those. Interesting. Shame Anarchist says, astro-theological symbolism everywhere in movies and adverts. Yeah, it is. It is all over the place. And it's hard to pick it apart and to differentiate astrotheology from, because once you start seeing connections and symbolism, and it's very hard to switch that off, and then you start to interpret everything through these like multiple layers of meaning and making connections between all sorts of things. And it's a lot of fun and I really enjoy doing it, but I have no idea who. I suppose I need to go to a good source on it, like Manly P. Hall, Secret Teachings of All Ages, or someone like that, to get a grasp of the basics, because I've heard various people talk about different symbolic interpretations of things. I never know because you don't know if that was the intention. You don't know the intention of the person who put it there, right? So it can be a tricky, slippery sort of rabbit hole to go down, but a lot of fun and very entertaining and interesting and very powerful. Symbols are extremely powerful, and I think people underestimate how influential and powerful symbols are, right? Rosemary says, thank you for your hard work reading books. You're very welcome. And it's not hard and I really enjoy it. So it's no problem at all. Cool. Let's see. I think that's some more thank you. You're all very welcome. Doing our homework for us like Jay Dyer and Oddman. Thanks, Mindhack. Yeah, that's what it's all about, right? Truly superb chapters. Thanks, Nick. Says Frank. You're very welcome, sir. There were really good chapters, actually. I'm glad that he talked about rights and where rights come from, because the belief in man-made authority is such a huge problem. Just because they've put a stamp on a piece of paper, or they've written it in red ink, or they've drafted a document or created a law, like man-made laws, man-made concepts of established authority figures and organizations, they're all below God and God's authority and the Creator's authority, who made this place, who sustains it, who put the natural law, which we all live under, into effect and keeps it going, right? The Creator did that. Nothing humans can ever do or create will change the natural law and the way it operates. It's fixed. We're in a deterministic universe. We have free will within that deterministic universe, but it is a deterministic universe. It's like things happen and move like clockwork. And part of that natural law is morality and objective morality, and understanding that our behavior is whatever we do gets etched into the fabric of space-time permanently, and it all adds up and it all amounts to something. And I think it's very wise for people to move away from morally relativistic type of systems, realize that they're self-refuting and nonsensical and dumb, and go towards the objective morality of being a good person, of not lying, of not initiating harm, of not stealing anything from anybody, of working hard, of trying to add value to the lives of other people around you, and try and embody some of that sort of Americanism that he was describing here. Because I think all these institutions and these rules and these treaties, it all just comes back to man-made bureaucracy designed to sap the life out of people and prevent them from living freely and peacefully together. That's what it all amounts to. Shame Anarchist is heading off for the night. So take care, and I'll hopefully see you on the next one. Adam says, very thankful for finding this channel. I'm thankful you found it too. It's always good to see you in the chat. Hasdak is off as well, and says, as a final comment, we have the 10 Commandments. So yeah. Exactly. And also, as a corollary to that, Mark Passio does a really good job video called the Real 7 Deadly Sins. And that's an excellent video to check out too. because his interpretation, his idea, and his addition and fleshing out of that concept of sinning and commandments is really good. Okay, I think that's it. A lot of people are saying goodnight and bowing out for the evening, so I am going to do the same. Thank you all for hanging out. Treat other people as you wish to be treated. That's the golden rule, isn't it? That's what I'm going to say to finish this off. If you ever feel like supporting in any way, I would gratefully, deeply appreciate it. allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews. Don't worry if you can't. It's all good. Share, like, subscribe, comment. Consider joining the mailing list where we can stay in touch in case the channel ever gets nuked. You never know. So that's autonomoususername@gmail.com. If you shoot me an email, I'll send you a free gift. Some people probably know what it is. It's music. It's guitar music. But there's some surprising. There's some stuff in there you haven't heard, let's say. And so consider doing that. If you are willing to trust me with your email address, I will treasure it and look after it. I haven't sent anything out to the mailing list so far. I'm just sort of building it up as a sort of insurance policy in case I ever get nuked. But I don't plan to. I plan to keep it clean and long-winded so that only people with long attention spans can really benefit from it, which is, let's face it, we're in the minority, aren't we? But yeah, take it easy. Next stream is going to be Saturday night. We'll be carrying on with another 2 or 3 chapters. 7 p.m. Saturday night. I will announce on Twitter, Instagram, or Telegram if it's a different timing for whatever reason. But for now, 7 p.m. Saturday night, we'll be back doing some more of this wonderful book. So thank you for being here, and I'll see you on the next one. God bless.